Guan Suyi was sitting in the arbor surrounded by greenery and arranging flowers. Two maids were standing on the left and right, handing out a flower branch or a pair of scissors from time to time. Outside the bamboo curtain, which was swayed back and forth by the breeze, was the setting sun and full of fallen leaves. Autumn is here. Madam, the eldest son is here, he wants to see you. The middle-aged servant woman's hasty footsteps disturbed the tranquility. Guan Suyi was stunned, her calm face showed a daze, as if she was reminiscing about who the big son was in the female population. After a while, she frowned slightly, and slowly but decisively uttered two words, "No see." The servant woman wanted to speak and stopped, but she also knew that the lady was stubborn and very assertive. Maybe she would never see her. But this is only a remote house in the Zhao family. Only domestic slaves or female relatives who have made mistakes will be sent over. Life is extremely miserable. How can it compare with the prosperity and wealth of Yanjing? The servant woman wanted to go back to the main house but had nowhere to go. She finally waited for the old man to come. Where would she miss the chance to cheat him? She left the wife's ideas behind her second door, and put the old man in. Guan Suyi, who had already inserted a bottle of golden chrysanthemum, was turning the vase, trying to find out the shortcomings. Suddenly, one of the golden chrysanthemum leaves was too luxuriant, lacking the artistic conception of blankness and the beauty of containment. He picked up the small scissors and wanted to trim it a bit. "Mother!" The guilty shout made her fingertips tremble slightly. The sharp blade missed the extra leaves, but cut off a beautiful golden chrysanthemum. Guan Suyi didn't immediately put down the scissors, nor did he show any annoyance. Even the frowning eyebrows flattened out at this time. She picked up the leaves with the tip of a knife, then took out the cut flower branches and threw them into the small bamboo basket beside her. Then she looked at the young man standing outside the pavilion with a panic and decadent face. Looking from top to bottom, touching the crutches in his hand and the obviously short left leg, Guan Suyi was a little surprised and wanted to ask, but after all, she didn't speak. Isn't she being assigned to Kangzhou precisely because of too much control? The young man saw the concern in her eyes, and the misery and guilt that had stuck in her heart instantly broke the bank, limped a few steps forward, and wanted to rush to the woman's feet to cry. Guan Suyi did not dodge, but the two maids had blocked the young man. They asked while supporting them, "Grandpa, what's the matter with you? But you have been wronged? Your foot is injured, you must not touch it." What kind of thing? Grievance can make the eldest son who regards his wife as an enemy not far away to find Kangzhou to complain, and is still in a bad situation? Even if the two of them didn't ask, the teenager was able to tolerate it. This question was like a flood, tears fell instantly, choking, and intermittently saying, "Mother, son, I'm sorry. You have always been strict with your son, and your son will be greedy for fun. Reprimand, you will be punished if you make a mistake, and you will be praised if you make a profit. You treat your son as your own, but your son listens to other people's slander. You always feel that you are ill-advised and hide your traitor, so you deliberately alienate yourself and get close to Aunt Yet. My son is really stupid. The son is wrong." Guan Suyi held his forehead with one hand, and placed the other flat on the stone table, tapping the edge of the table with his fingertips, as if he was listening attentively, and he seemed to be stunned. "Aunt Yet? Which Auntie Yet?" After 2 years in Kangzhou, she deliberately forgot about Zhao's mansion, and it took quite a while to find this person from the dusty memory. Aunt Yet is the cousin of Zhao Lulai's original wife. She is connected with Zhao Lulai's prostitutes and prostitutes. It can be said that she has watched them grow up since childhood and looked very similar to their mothers, completely satisfying the children's desire for maternal love. She was just an aunt, but she was quite popular in the Haofu. Zhao Lulai was also particularly infatuated because of her similar appearance to his wife. Needless to say, the two children treated her as their biological mother. On the other hand, Guan Suyi is not embarrassed or embarrassed. There is no prominent family background, and no rich dowry. In order to gain a foothold in Kui Wei's Zhenbihou mansion, she has no other choice but to restrain herself and keep her duty. She did everything she could to serve her mother-in-law, take care of her husband, educate her children, and fulfill her duties, but in the end she was ruined. The unbearable memory became clear again, and the corners of Guan Suyi's mouth lightly raised, as if mocking the original self, as if mocking the young man crying miserably and desperately under the stairs. "What's wrong with your legs?" she asked quietly. After receiving the long-lost care from his mother, the young man burst into tears and felt guilty. The son's leg was broken. It was Aunt Ye who bought the boyfriend next to her son and asked him to lure her son to fight with the ranger. Saying that you will never be able to walk like ordinary people anymore, it is considered abolished. In order for Zhao Guang to inherit the throne of Zhenbei Marquis, she ruined her son's life. "Mother, you have always been strict with your son, teach your son to read, and order your son to observe courtesy, but there is mistakes and omissions must be punished. On the other hand, Aunt Yet, she just blindly indulges herself, telling her son to go farther and farther on the treacherous road, and this is what we are today." Guan Suyi's eyes were distant and unpredictable. The young boy once called Aunt Ye so affectionately, but only said Mrs. when he came to him. He had never called mother in half. When she left Zhao's mansion, she thought, "I don't know how long the harmony of this family will last," but she didn't expect that only 2 years will come. Broken leg, waist, Ye Fan really cruel. The teenager was distraught and did not notice his mother, who was obviously distracted. He pours out, "At this moment, the son finally figured out that what is good for you may not be really good, and what is bad for you may not be really bad." Guan Suyi smiled silently, her eyes becoming more and more mocking. "What is bad for you?" She had to worry about eating, clothing, housing, and transportation, studying martial arts, and even her marriage. Forget it, encountering such a wolf-hearted family, it is not wrong to end up in today's end. Guan Suyi shook his head and sighed slightly. Hearing the sigh, the guilt in his heart grew stronger. He hesitated for a moment and finally confessed, "Mother, my son was so wrong back then. You should not listen to Aunt Ye's instigation and slander you and Master Su. Although your son's legs and feet are useless, Aunt Ye I can't please. With my father here, the title of the Marquis of Zhenbei is still mine. When I become the son of the world, I will definitely take you back to serve." At this point, his eyes turned red, his fists were also clenched hard, and he made a click sound like a cracked bone, as if enduring great humiliation and anger. Hesitating and hesitating, and then hesitating, he gritted his teeth and squeezed out a word, "Mother, do you know? My mother is not dead." "Your mother?" Guan Suyi was in a daze for a while before he realized that Zhao Wangshu's mother was Zhao Lulai's original wife, Ye Zhen. She was not dead, how could it be possible? Zhao Lulai wanted to die with his wife and continue his relationship. If she hadn't died, how could he not look for it, and how could he want to marry another person? Soon, the boy gave the answer, "My mother is Ye Zhen. She is not my mother's twin sister, she is my mother at all. To be prosperous, she abandoned her husband and son, and hates my father and my sister. Knowing the truth, she still helped her everywhere, and even killed your fetus for this, and sent you to Kangzhou on the charge of losing your virginity. She has already converted to the embrace of others, why should she dominate her father, why should she let put me in such an unbearable life experience?" The boy changed from a low sob to crying. The Aunt Ye he loved was cruel, cold-blooded, and merciless. The dead mother he admired used to be greedy for wealth and abandon her husband and children. But what she cares about is not this incredible, ridiculous scandal, but the middle sentence. "It was not an accident that I failed, but the hands of your father and your sister." Guan Suyi's plain heart suddenly stirred up a storm when thinking of the only night that was extremely humiliating. It's ridiculous. Zhao Lulai never touched her after 5 years of marrying Zhao's family, only once when she was drunk. To this day, she still remembered the disgusting alcohol on his body and the sound of Ye Zhen that kept echoing in her ears, full of love and guilt. He regarded her as a substitute for cherishing the memory of his dead wife, and this substitute wanted to give birth to an offspring, which would interfere with the interests of the original children, which was naturally intolerable. After thinking about everything, Guan Suyi's calm face finally shattered, and he asked slowly, "I can't blame Zhao Lulai, I'm sorry Zhao Chengzi? Why are you doing this to me? What a pure family style in Zhenbihou mansion, what a noble original wife, what a virtuous and virtuous, well-loved Yejiu, but it turns out that the male thief and the female prostitute are the same as the dog." The young man was ashamed but faintly pleased. The male thief and the female prostitution are the same as the dog, and the scolding is really right. Only mothers are most qualified to scold like this. He knelt down willingly, thinking that his mother would lose control and vent, but when he saw her suddenly chuckled and shook his head, he quickly recovered his calmness. It's a good thing to lose a tire. Guan Suyi stroked her flat abdomen, only to feel the pain of guilt and regret buried deep in her heart, disappearing without a trace at this moment. Suyi Zhu Xi, from the child to woe, Suyi white, pure and good character, this is the grandfather's expectation of her, although falling into the quagmire of Zhao's family cannot escape, she was not contaminated with the slightest filth after all. This child is not a hope or sustenance for the future, but a sin, no matter if he doesn't come. If the father is not the father, the mother is not the mother, the son is not the son, how can the Zhao family stay in chaos? Guan Suyi had anticipated this a long time ago, but she didn't think that there was such a shocking inside story hidden in it, which really opened her eyes. She didn't care about the repentance of a teenager, and she didn't want to be a tool for him to express his grief and resentment. Just as she was trying to get someone to drag him away, someone came from the Yanjing Zhao mansion and carried the eldest son with his unhealed leg into the carriage and quickly left. Outside the pavilion, the autumn cicadas screamed and the tired birds flew. Guan Suyi was in a daze for a while, and then took out the golden chrysanthemums in the bottle and replaced them with twisted thorns and withered reeds. The spikes of thorns pierced the fingertips, causing a piercing pain, but she seemed unconscious, her expression remained flat and calm from beginning to end. After trimming the reed flock with scissors, Guan Suyi laughed at herself. What a weird and sad work, just like her life. What if it were able to reconcile in the first place? Knowing that Zhao's house is a puddle of unsmelling dirt, she could not walk or keep it, so she could only watch as she drowned. From the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of a few books on the table, and she finally showed an expression of resentment and threw them into the tea-making stove and put them on fire. The maid exclaimed, "Madam, don't you read these books every day? How to burn them? My half-life tragedy probably originated from this, how can I not burn it?" Guan Suyi stared at the flames and smoke that rose suddenly, her eyes aching and tears gradually rising. Another maid pulled sister-in-law and told her to stop talking. If the wife was born 5 years earlier and met the strange flowers of the Zhao family, she would have remarried herself to Xiao Ao, how could there be today? If it weren't for the popularity of Su's Neo-Confucianism, if it weren't for the popularity of NVG, internal training and other books, how could the wife be imprisoned here and not free? If she remarries with a divorce, it would be tantamount to ruining the reputation of the sisters in the clan, making them lonely and helpless in their future marriages, so they can only lose their teeth and swallow them with blood. Those fake Taoists are really harmful. After this day, Su Shi felt that there was no hope of being alive, and Guan Suyi's unhealthy body was rapidly exhausting. When the deadline was approaching, she seemed to hear the footsteps of Zhao Lulai and Zhao Wangshu hurrying and distressed. Confession, but only left one sentence, "I wish I could never see you again in the next life and the next life." Guan Suyi originally thought that she would regain a child after death, but she opened her eyes and saw a plum forest covered in black mist. Snowflakes drifting in the mist, a little illusory, but appear so real because of the sudden cold air. Guan Suyi was stunned for a while before realizing that the black mist shrouded in everything in front of him was because he was wearing a power fence on his head. The black gauze at the edge of the power fence was blown by the cold wind, and a few snowflakes got in and fell on the tip of her nose, making her shiver for no reason. "Miss, are you cold? The maidservant will go back to get the stove." The crisp voice awakened Guan Suyi, who was hovering between confusion and reality. She lifted the corner of the black veil, and the hazy world immediately became clear and vivid. Her extraordinary memory tells her that this is the Milan in the backyard of the Jueyan temple. When the Guan family moved into Yanjing, they temporarily lived for a few days due to house repairs. "Where's grandfather? Where's your parents?" Guan Suyi tentatively asked Ming Lan carefully. She understood that she was back to the past, back to the time when she first entered Yanjing, and everything has not yet begun. It is not difficult to make this judgment. The coldness of the body cannot be faked, the cold wind like a steel knife cannot be faked, the suffocation of death cannot be faked, and Minglan, who is much younger, cannot fake it. The old lady is attending the literary meeting in Bodhi Garden. The master and his wife went to the Baishan pavilion to enjoy the snow and paint, and maybe they won't be able to come back in the evening. Minglan rubbed her hands. "Miss, let's go to Bodhi Garden. It's too cold here. Be careful not to freeze." She is a little girl who can't understand such an elegant thing as an appreciation of plums in the snow. "When Hui?" Guan Suyi was in a daze for a moment, then turned around and went to Bodhi Garden. Regardless of whether all this is true or not, or the refraction of the reincarnation mirror, she is willing to change from this moment on. There are several huge braziers burning in the courtyard, and the raging flames breathe in the heat, setting off the surroundings as warm as spring. Compared with the outside world where snowflakes are flying and the cold wind is cold, it is indeed much more comfortable and lively here. A group of men gathered around the stone table to talk, a few little novice monks concentrated on making tea, and the luthier bowed their heads to make the strings. The noisy and long sound of the piano gave a long and lasting meaning. A few women stood in the water pavilion not far from the stone table, whispering to each other, laughing and playing, or leaning on a railing to look out, thinking for themselves. There were also a few pointing at the men, seeming to be discussing something. The mixed images of men and women make Guan Suyi a little nostalgic, but also a little sad. After Su's Neo-Confucianism flourishes, such scenes will probably no longer be seen. Now they never imagined that after 5 or 6 years, Mo said that if they criticized men, they would have no chance to step out of the second door. The door does not go out, and the 2 doors do not move. This commandment traps women alive in the back house, and also traps them in one after another unfortunate marriages dominated by men. Divorce Wife has become a reminder for women, and the 4 books for women has become a soul talisman for women. You are a husband's family or a husband's ghost. Thinking of this, Guan Suyi looked cold and walked slowly to stand beside her grandfather. She wears a power fence on her head to hide Duan Li's vulgar appearance, but she is still eye-catching with her dusty temperament. Due to the gentleman's demeanor, these people didn't ask much, just glanced at it without a trace and continued the debate. At this time, the status of women was not low, and there were even several politicians and historians, and there were many concubines who held the power of the country. As long as someone recommends you, you can enter such a place like Wenhui. The reason why Guan Suyi wears a power fence to block her face is not because of the women's precepts, but because the world is too chaotic and bandits are rampant, so she has to protect herself. At this time, the regime changes frequently. Today you will be the king, and tomorrow I will become the throne. The various nations will conquer each other, so a large number of people who fish in troubled waters have been born. Misfortunes can come from the sky while staying at home, let alone long-distance migration. Guan Suyi has always been cautious, not to mention her appearance, but her face is more than enough. In order not to cause trouble to her family, she is indispensable, and she is always equipped with a sharp silver hairpin for self-defense or suicide. Not only her, but men and women in troubled times are like this. Close to the black gauze that was tossed by the wind, she bent over and stretched out her hand to add a cup of hot tea for her grandfather. Mr. Guan studied Confucianism all his life. He was very knowledgeable, but suffered from poor eloquence. He was frequently asked questions at this literary meeting. For a while, he was red-faced and described as embarrassed. The era of fighting for hegemony has just passed. The Huo family, a descendant of the Zhuai ethnic group, ruled the 5 central plains and invited people of great patriots from all over the world to serve for the court. The literati who were familiar with poetry and books waited for such an opportunity, so they responded and gathered in Yanjing. At this time, all the scholars had their own opinions, and they all wanted to grow up to realize their ambitions, and the phenomenon of squeezing each other out was very serious. In order to become famous, to attract the attention of the upper echelons, and to refute the views of other schools for the best interests of the teachers, they frequently hold literary conferences like today. Guan Suyi listened quietly, slapping his emotional grandfather on the back from time to time, trying to relax him. The farther behind, the sharper the arguments of the legal scholars became, and the others gradually became unable to parry. As the backbone of the Confucian school, my grandfather has endured the most questioning. Seeing that his grandfather was forced to a dead end, the scribes of the same school cast anxious and dissatisfied eyes at him, and Guan Suyi's lips moved slightly, as if he was pondering. Through the hazy black veil, she was staring at the very elegant and handsome middle-aged man with a goatee who was hidden in the crowd. That was Su Guangji, the founder of Su's Neo-Confucianism, who became popular in the future, and a generation of Confucianism semisage respected by Emperor Sheng Yuan. Although he was still unknown at this time, Guan Suyi knew that in a few moments, when his grandfather was forced to vomit blood, he would come forward and refute all the scholars present one by one, thus establishing his own reputation. Being pragmatic and powerful like a legalist, and eloquent like a political strategist, he is also defeated by his clever tongue. It is precisely by virtue of the wonderful performance of this literary meeting that he became a representative of Confucianism in one fell swoop, and finally embarked on an official career and achieved steady progress. Guan Suyi does not think that she has the ability to change this era, nor does she want to compete with Su Guangji for winning or losing. She just doesn't want this person to step on her grandfather's position anymore, let alone watch her grandfather indulge in this failure. Depressed. In the previous life, she sat beside her grandfather and listened in the same way. She deliberately argued a few words for her grandfather. However, due to etiquette, she did not dare to say anything, until her grandfather suddenly vomited blood. What kind of etiquette in this life? What a woman's ignorance is virtue, go to hell. Thinking of this, Guan Suyi suddenly held down the trembling left hand of his grandfather, and slowly said, "If you talk about 100 schools of thought, you should respect Confucianism." The scene was quiet for a while, and Su Guangji, who was about to step out, walked back silently, and his icy eyes looked back and forth on the woman's black power fence. Guan Suyi drank a sip of hot tea, unhurriedly and authentically. The saints follow ancient rituals, treat people with courtesy, and govern the country with courtesy. Therefore, there is courtesy first, then the clan, then the township party, and the state. The heroes are all. Extinction means the unification of the state, and the patriarchal ethics and ethics are immortal, and the patriarchal ethics and ethics are immortal, and the people will obey. This is what the saint said. I don't know the etiquette, there is no way to stand. In the middle of the world, the people can make no mistakes. She turned to look at the aggressive legal scholars, and continued, the so-called legalists so-called fix disputes, rejoice and fear violence, all kinds of laws and regulations are established. Based on the patriarchal and ritual education, how can it be qualified to criticize the Confucianism who respects the ancient rites? Human relations are the righteous way, and the etiquette is the foundation of Wanghua. All theories cannot escape the difficulties of these two. Therefore, Confucianism, which values human relations and respects ethics, is a well-deserved academic supremacy. The sage said the Tao is governed by the government, the public is to be punished, the people are free and shameless, the Tao is based on virtue, and the court is based on integrity, and there is shame and morality. It is the real power of enlightenment and the way to govern the people. As soon as she finished speaking, Confucian scholars shook their hands in applause. Su Guangji looked down and pondered. He never expected that this woman was quite talented. It was really sharp to refute legalists from the basis of legislation, but it was not without flaws. He thought of countless mistakes and omissions in an instant, only to wait for the legal scholars to drive him to the end of his life and show his power again. Old man Guan breathed a sigh of relief, and patted the back of his granddaughter's hand with relief. He had only such a granddaughter, who taught him how to be a gentleman since he was a child, and he has never fallen behind in the 6 arts of a gentleman. As long as she is willing to speak, it is more than enough to deal with this kind of scene. When it comes to human relations and ethics, the scholars on the scene find it difficult. No matter how they oppose Confucianism, they dare not say that their school exists outside of human relations and ethics. Then they become heretics, or even evil schools, and they will definitely be criticized by the world. While the others were thinking and thinking, Guan Suyi touched the teacup and softly persuaded him, "Grandfather, take a sip of hot tea slowly." The saints said a gentleman is a savvy man, but he is quick to act. It's not your fault to speak badly, it's your virtue. After hearing this, the Confucian scholars who were dissatisfied with the old man all introspected, and their faces were ashamed. And the old man Guan was completely relieved, and smiled while stroking his beard. Seeing his pale complexion gradually eased, Guan Suyi let go of his high-hanging heart, and said to the legal scholar who was about to stand up to refute him, "Guan Zhong changes the law to prosper, and 1 generation will end, and all will die. Li Li's reform will reinvigorate the Wei, a generation." Stop, Wei died, Wu Qi reformed the law to rejuvenate Chu, 1 generation only, Chu died, Shang Yang reformed the law to reinvigorate the Qin, and eventually unified the Central Plains to establish a hegemony, another generation stopped, and then the heroes competed, the society collapsed. The countries changed laws and tyranny died. Dare to ask everyone, why is this? Where is the eternal way of the legalists? If you can't even answer this question, isn't it a joke that you keep trying to govern and transform the country into a strong country? As soon as this remark came out, the audience was silent. Throughout history, reforms have indeed helped many countries to prosper, but they have also driven them to extinction very quickly. This is indeed the biggest drawback of legalists. However, no one has said clearly what this drawback is, nor can they understand it. The woman's question was like a dagger pierced into the heart, hitting the point. The legal scholars were dumb and embarrassed, but Guan Suyi had helped his grandfather to get up and said goodbye. The scholars hurriedly got up to send each other off, and frequently rushed to the old man, praised his family's learning origin and good education. Su Guangji, who had a lot to say, saw that the rest of the people were all gone. Although he laughed on the surface, he hated it inside. What Guan Suyi wanted was that he had nothing to say, and did not post if he had aspirations. Only then did he raise a few questions to completely confuse the essays. If Su Guangji wants to become famous and embark on an official career, just look for another opportunity, but using his grandfather as a stepping stone, this life will never let him do so. After a group of people left, the women also felt bored and left in 2s and 3s. A sturdy man with a fortified face turned out from behind the rockery, staring thoughtfully at the direction where Guan's grandfather and grandson had left. Following him, the white-faced, sharp-sounding old man admired, "It's not a lie to say that all the women in the Central Plains are talented and knowledgeable." Seeing the man raised his eyebrows and laughed sarcastically, the old man's conversation turned, but his vision is limited, and he is finally narrow. Although the master invites celebrities and intends to ask them for advice on how to govern the country, he has long thoughts in his heart. All the books on his desk are legalist classics, and the most respected ones are also legalist scholars, who obviously value legalists more. And wait, the era of the philosophers and the 100 schools will soon pass, and the legalists will do their best in the future, and the reform of the law and system is imminent. The man glanced at the old man with a smile, with a deep and mellow voice. Send someone to check the ancestor and grandson just now. In his heart, he wondered, where is the eternal way of the Fa school? This is indeed a problem. The air fluctuated slightly, and after a while, the dead soldier hiding in the dark left quietly to investigate the background of Guan's family. The resolute man is exactly Huo Zhenj, who first proclaimed himself emperor. His father was originally the leader of the Zhuai tribe, but he rose up because of his dissatisfaction with the tyranny of the Qin state. He wiped out or annexed all forces all the way and eventually became the hegemon of the Central Plains. However, his knowledge and courage were limited. He only held the Son of Heaven, and made himself a prince with a righteous prince, and he checked and balanced with the other 4 princes, and had nothing to do with each other. This restless brother also killed the little emperor, and then unified the rivers and mountains, ascended to the throne, changed the country's name to Wei and the honorary title to Sheng Yuan, implying that he was the first sage to pioneer the world. This shows how arrogant and self-reliant Huo Zhenj is. Although he came from a barbarian, he loves Han culture very much. He possesses superior insight and talent in politics and military affairs. Although he has never governed the country, he understands that as an emperor, the most important thing is not to do it himself, but to be good at discovering and using talents. At the same time, we must find the right way to govern the country. After experiencing the struggle for hegemony among the warlords during the Spring and Autumn and Warring States period, and the tyranny and fragmentation of the Qin period, almost every hero who wants to be king or a literati and warrior who tries to save the common people is thinking about the same question: how to govern the country. They are either for personal gain or for the people of Li people, and the doctrines of the philosophers and hundreds of schools have also been greatly promoted. Fagia, Zagia, Taoism, Moism, and Confucianism have appeared one after another, and they have also sent disciples to visit various vassal states to lobby and have made many attempts. Among them, the most successful is undoubtedly the Fagia. Since Huo Zhenj learned Chinese characters, the first article he read was Han Fei's 5 Beetles. At that time, he was shocked and shocked. He immediately collected all of the legalist classics. Even if the government is busy, he will draw 2 out every day. Time to delve into it. Looking back at the classics of the Confucian school, he no longer knew where he had thrown them. Hearing that the Julian Temple will hold a debate between legalism and Confucianism, he immediately hurried over to observe in the wind and snow, planning to find a few usable talents. The white-faced old man called Beifu, who was one of the servants left by the emperor of the previous dynasty. Because of his outstanding ability and good at observing words and colors, he was fortunate to be favored by Emperor Sheng Yuan and served as a regular servant. Seeing that his master only sent dead men to investigate the 2 grandfathers and grandchildren, but never mentioned the few scholars who had just performed outstandingly, he was puzzled, but he didn't dare to ask more. The new master's temper is extremely changeable, sometimes staunch and straightforward, sometimes vicious, sometimes open-minded, sometimes elegant and gentle, and even a seasoned courtier can play in the palm of his hand, which is unfathomable. Wanting to guess what he was thinking, Bai Fu was only 50 years old, and it would be useless to live another 50 years. Shenjia came and returned in a hurry, and no one knew that as soon as he entered the Viang Palace, the dead man had already given a secret letter, which recorded all the circumstances of the Guan family and his relatives in the Wufu family. Huo Zhenj looked at it for a long time, and sighed, with both talents and virtues, innocent family background, and loyalty, Guan Kiguang can use it a lot. After speaking, he raised the brush and wrote 2 edicts with the handwriting of iron and silver hooks, thinking about it. Feeling insufficient, the 3 words Guan Suyi were added to the list of candidates for beauties. Bai Fu secretly took a breath, and for a while he realized, and then for a while, he felt more puzzled, the emperor was planning to promote the Guan family. Not only did he order the Guan family's father and son to be official, he also included the Guan family's daughter into the harem. This greater grace. However, he used to admire the legalists so much, but now he doesn't mention a word. What on earth do he want to do? What are you trying to achieve? When others wondered for themselves, Huo Zhenj had put 2 edicts into a cassette, then spread a piece of brocade and wrote carefully and slowly. As a Zhongchang attendant, Bai Fu knew a few words quite a bit, and was stunned after a short glance, only to see the black ink spreading out such a sentence: Ming Kong's family, suppressing Beijia. Bai Fu blinked his eyes quickly, and finally understood that the rule of the country that the emperor wanted to promote and practice was not legalist thinking, but Confucianism. How come? When Bai Fu secretly sighed that Emperor Sheng Yuan was unpredictable, an unremarkable little yellow door sneaked into Ganquan Palace and reported the emperor's white dragonfish suit and secretly checked the family to the head woman. The woman is in her early 30s, but she is well maintained, her skin is delicate, her face is beautiful, her pale lips and frowning eyebrows show that she seems to be ill, and her gestures and feet are full of frail and pitiful amorous feelings. Feel pity for it. She is the most beloved concubine Ye Zhen of Emperor Sheng Yuan, who has just been named Jiyu, only 2 steps away from the position of the queen. The Emperor Sheng Yuan spent years on expeditions outside the country, and had no time or mind to find a woman. Although he is now on the throne, he is busy with government affairs, and the dragon is even more invisible. His concubines in the harem are full of calculations, but they can't be slapped, and several of them were selected by the Queen Mother on her own initiative, and have not seen each other so far. Because Ye Zhen had a life-saving grace for him, and he had an unspeakable shame to Ye Zhen, his attitude was very different. The woman next to her was still watching the hidden mansion, so he immediately connected Ye Zhen to Yanjing, giving her a high position and real power, and even the Queen Mother passed over. Now Ye Zhen has neither Ziyi nor Queen above him. Except for the Changle Palace of the Queen Mother, all other palaces have to look forward to her head and drive several small yellow gates. Even if the small yellow gate is by the emperor's side, it is easy. The dead men were only responsible for protecting the emperor's safety. The emperor didn't talk about investigating, so naturally they would not follow and monitor an inconspicuous eunuch. Oh? You said that the emperor added the name of Guan's prostitute to Sunfang Lu. Ye Zhen's beautiful eyes opened slightly, and the lazy body leaning on the soft couch finally sat upright. This is absolutely true, my mother. That Sun Feng Luo was handed over to Yeting Cheng by a slave, and he will never be mistaken. The original list did not contain the word Guanxi, but now it is added at the first place. It is the handwriting of the emperor without a doubt. Xia Huangman is a direct disciple of Beifu, and naturally some sources have learned these secrets. It is a rule left over from the previous dynasty to fill up the harem by a wide selection of beauties in August every year. Because it was the first time to do an errand, the Chinese doctor and Yeting Cheng didn't dare to neglect. They searched for 4 or 5 months to submit the list, and hurriedly let the newcomer into the palace a year ago, warmed the emperor's quilt, and opened the branches and leaves. The top 10 on the list are all the noble ladies of the July ethnic group personally selected by the Queen Mother. Their pedigree has overshadowed others. Ye Zhen cannot refute it, but how sacred this Guanxi is, it actually weighs on the heads of many noble ladies. Superior? She sent away the little yellow door, and said in deep thought, Ying He, bring a message to my father, so that he can check this Guanxi carefully. All the people of the July nationality are soldiers, and as long as a sword is given, both men and women of all ages can go into battle. Therefore, most of the women in the tribe are stout and bold in words and deeds, without the gentle and freehand brushwork of the women of the Central Plains. In the face of these vulgar people who don't know a big character, Ye Zhen is not afraid, no matter how much she is the #1 beauty in the Central Plains, and also the #1 talented woman. As long as the world's men are not blind, they will never abandon the beautiful jade and make dross. Furthermore, Emperor Sheng Yuan admired sinology very much, and only she in the harem could understand what he was talking about and what he was thinking. He often praised her as Ji Yahua, which shows that this is her biggest advantage in the harem. However, the old pious queen mother could not see her doting on the sixth house alone, and she proposed to choose concubines from the two races. Waiting for more Han women who have studied poetry and learned to come in, can she keep this special? Thinking of this, Ye Zhen felt a little flustered in his heart, stroked his cheek unconsciously with his fingertips, and slowly calmed down. She lacks confidence in her talents, because Gain's name as the first talented woman was passed down from the army. The soldiers of the Julai nationality didn't even know Chinese characters, so how did she know what the real Wu Chai is? But when it comes to looks, it's not that Ye Zhen is boasting. After 30 years of life, she has never seen a woman who looks more beautiful than herself. If the emperor doesn't even look down on you, who else can he look at? Ye Zhen, don't panic, the emperor will definitely belong to you, and that position will definitely belong to you. Everything you throw away and everything you endure will be worth it. After waiting for the maid to leave, Ye Zhen muttered to himself as he walked to the window and stared at the Jiaofang Hall, his eyes full of wild hope. After living in the Juyin Temple for about a month, the newly purchased house of the Guan family was finally repaired, and he chose a lucky day to move in. Guan Suyi paced back and forth in the newly furnished boudoir, with a confused and nostalgic expression on her face. After more than 30 days of repeated verification, she gradually confirmed the fact that she had been reborn. Perhaps the illusion produced in the mirror of reincarnation can also reach the point of being fake, but she didn't want to miss any chance to change her destiny. This time, she would never step into Zhao's house, and she didn't want to see Zhao Luolai even one side. As soon as she put her luggage in order, Guan Mu Zhong Kaling sent her servant to call her, saying that she had something to discuss. Guan Suyi knew what she wanted to say, and she couldn't help but sigh inwardly. After entering the Shangfang, Zhong passed a few posts over, because the mother-in-law passed away. It took 3 years of filial piety. This delay, unknowingly, you are 18, and you have missed a lifelong event. I originally wanted to be with your father. Among my disciples, I picked a few of good morals, but I didn't expect that the old lady suddenly decided to go north to Yanqing. Right now we are unfamiliar with the land, which is really unthinkable, and your age is getting older and can't be delayed, so my mother can only take you to attend more. I have been together a few times and look at each other. You can pick and choose these posts first. They all have a son of the right age in the family, the second son of the Zhou family. Listening to her mother's endless narration, Guan Suyi's eyes wandered, remembering the past. In his previous life, Zhao Luolai had fallen in love with her at a certain banquet. Originally, based on the family background of the Guan family, it was absolutely impossible to climb into a high-end and deep house like Zhenbiu. The parents and grandfather were also very hesitant at first, and only agreed with Zhao Luolai's talents and personality after examining Zhao Luolai's talents and personality. However, after passing the door, she knew that what Zhao Luolai was fond of was her humble family background and knowledgeable temperament. What he wanted was not a wife, but a servant who would take care of his children and serve his mother. It's ridiculous that she did everything he asked for, not sincere, but malicious, even cruel. Now that it's all over again, she doesn't want to take revenge, she just hopes the years will be well. As for Mrs. Zhenbiu in this life, who should be? Who do you love, what to do with her? Guan Suyi picks and chooses among the many posts, and Zhong will introduce which son she picks up. It can be seen that she has already sent someone to inquire about it clearly. In her life, she has only one daughter, Guan Suyi, and naturally she dare not take her daughter's marriage lightly. However, the news from the matchmaker or neighbors is accurate, and most of them are untrue and glorious words. As Guan Suyi listened carefully, she sighed in her heart. Among the 7 or 8 men of the right age, according to her last life, there were at least 6 wives and concubines in the house in groups, and the back house was chaotic, and one died before the week crown. and their family status is comparable to that of the Guan family, with neither power nor wealth. However, even so, they have to accept concubines one by one, as if they are comparing something, they are not entrusted to their beloved for life. Nowadays, women still have some status that is hard to stop. After 4 or 5 years, Su's Neo-Confucianism is completely prevalent. His thought of preserving the laws of nature and destroying human desires has spawned a large number of hypocrites, and has pushed the oppression and cruelty of women to the extreme. Guan Suyi has really experienced it once, as if she has regarded marriage as a daunting way, so where can she dare to jump into the fire pit? But she couldn't tell her mother about her experience. After thinking about it for a moment, she replied, "Mother, we still need to find someone who knows the bottom line, lest her daughter will be wronged but have nowhere to complain after marrying. Grandfather and father are all over the world. There will be several disciples coming to Yanjing together, so wait and see. After all, marrying is a lifelong event and must be done carefully. My daughter would rather put it aside for another 3 years than pay by mistake." The Zhong family was also reluctant to suffer from his daughter. He was still a daughter at home, and became a little daughter-in-law when he went out. In private, he didn't know how to be harassed by his in-laws and husband. Day is a teacher and a father for life, I never dared to treat her too badly. Thinking of this, Zhong hurriedly retracted the post, and he was planning to write down one by one after a while. She thought for a moment, and smiled, "Fortunately, you reminded my mother that my mother remembered that your 4 brothers will be entering Beijing in a few days. Although his family is embarrassed, his talents and character are first class, and his parents are both honest person. I just don't know if you want to suffer from poverty." How can poverty be regarded as suffering? Even though Guan Suyi smiled, she was about to nod and promised but stopped in time. The 4th brother is indeed a rare good son in the world. He has a good character and is full of learning. If you marry him, even if you eat chaffy vegetables every day, it will be more comfortable than staying in Zhenbihufu to enjoy the delicacies of the mountains and the sea, the beautiful clothes and the beautiful clothes. But the problem is that in his previous life, his wife was another person. The husband and wife had a sound and mellow voice, and they were loving and white-haired. If they agreed at this time, it would seem to have stolen the fate of others. If she takes away the luck of others because of her own misfortune, Guan Suyi can't pass the hurdle in her heart. In my memory, a man like senior brother Si who can rely on for life is rare in the world. If he misses it at this time, he may fall into another quagmire. Guan Suyi can't help but shook his head and sighed, "Mother, my daughter doesn't want to marry. As a woman, how can you not marry? Yubi is shy, right?" The Zhong clan embraced his daughter and patted. Guan Suyi also knew that she was a little silly, so she changed her words, "Mother, the 4th brother's family is poor, and my daughter is afraid that she can't bear the suffering. Please take another look. Next time I will continue to find excuses to push it away." In her life, she would rather be a female crown than marry. Zhong squeezed his daughter's tender little face, and thought to himself, "I can't stand the hardship. It's not like Yi said if he dislikes the poor and loves the rich. Don't this child have a sweetheart but be ashamed to be provocative, right? She hinted over and over again that I was looking for my husband's disciples, which one did I see? It's not a small 4, is it a small 6? Minglin and Mingfang have to be found and asked carefully." When Zhong's family was busy marrying his daughter Zhang Luo, Mrs. Ye handed out the sign and went to see him in the palace. In the Ganquan Palace, the mother and daughter held back a secret conversation. "Where is Guan Suyi's sacred? Your Majesty is worried about it." Ye Zhen's eyes were full of stern expression. "Your father has checked it out. Guan Suyi is the granddaughter of Confucian master Guan Keguang. She had a relationship with your Majesty at the Jueyan temple that day. Su had taken a fancy to it at that time." Ye Mu said anxiously, "Now the emperor has announced to the world, canonized Kongming as a sage of Confucianism, a teacher of the world, and praised Confucianism as the way of the king, and built a Confucian temple in the suburbs of Beijing, wanting to go to worship in person. Nowadays, Confucian scholars have been reused. As the master of Confucianism, Guan Keguang is in a high position and can be expected. Your father has received definite news. In 2 days, His Majesty will call Guan family father and son to be an official. Guan Yunkai will be named Taikanking by Jin. They are worth 10,000 stones. Before this, they were just ordinary people without power and influence. When the words were over, Lu showed a gritted expression, showing that he was extremely unhappy about the sudden wealth of the Guan family. Ye Zhen was also greatly shocked, and said in surprise, Tai Chongqing? That is the head of the Juking, in charge of the etiquette of the ancestral temple. The status is very precious. And the official position of the emperor is unprecedented, the rank is 10,000 stones, and the honor is comparable. The prime minister, how do they deserve to be worthy of their common people? The Lu hurriedly agreed, yes, your father is still the head of the country, but he only sealed a Taishi Cheng with a salary of 400 stones, and he could not even support his family. Before Guan Suyi entered the palace, the emperor carried Guan's house to him. With such a high position, does it mean that she cannot be canonized as a queen? Ye Zhen immediately denied, with the queen mother, the queen has no turn for a Han woman to do it. But there is still a place of Zheyi, did you forget? Lu reminded worriedly. Yes, there is Zheyi above Jiu, who is the vice-empress, who is also powerful enough to overwhelm himself. If the emperor wanted to promote Confucianism, he would naturally elevate the Guan family, a position of Zheyi, he would definitely be willing. Ye Zhen frowned and tightened, and said, how is Guan Suyi's appearance? Liu's eyes flickered, and he was about to modify his words, but he listened to her daughter's stern command, to tell the truth. If you deliberately belittle her, my palace will underestimate the enemy. You should know how underestimating the enemy will end. The back home is full of swords and shadows, intrigues and deceit, let alone the palace where the dirt is hidden. If the daughter is a little careless, she will lose everything, and the Ye family will surely fall. Thinking of this, Lu did not dare to conceal it, and said anxiously, Na Guan Suyi has followed Guan Keguang to study literary characters since childhood. Guan Keguang is a gentleman who is proficient in all 6 arts, poetry, ci, song, and fu. Fang also praised him as a generation of literary magnates, and his talents and scholarship are evident. Whereas Ye Zhen patiently listening to Guan Keguang's deeds, and was about to wave his hand to interrupt, but listened to his mother's words. Someone once said that Guan Suyiking is better than Blue because of Blue, and his talent is not under Guan Keguang. Guan Keguang is such a modest and prudent person. But also nodded and smiled, showing that she agrees with Guan Suyi's talents. Niang, you are afraid that she is inferior to her in this aspect. Ye Zhen gently curled the corners of his lips and asked, what about his looks? Seeing her daughter's conceited look, the Lu family became more afraid to hide it. Do you remember the poem Shuo Ren? Guan Suyi's appearance is about comparable to Zhuang Zhang. Ye Zhen was stunned for a while before speaking with a trembling voice, it's a big man, his hands are like catkins, his skin is like fat, his collar is like a grub, his teeth are like a rhinoceros, his head and eyebrows are like a rhinoceros, he smiles beautifully and looks forward to his beautiful eyes. Is that true? Someone really grows up like this? Liu's nodded heavily, my sister-in-law and I have both quietly visited, and it is true. You and her, you are still a little bit worse than her. Ye Zhen heard the jealousy and helplessness in his mother's voice. I am afraid that it is not only a little bit worse, but a lot, right? She is so beautiful and beautiful, she can't imagine what a woman who is more outstanding than herself should be. She can't compare with her talents and her looks. Now even her family background is overwhelmed. When Guan Suyi enters the palace, how can she survive? In recent years, she has offended the Queen Mother and other concubines all over the world. Seeing her fall out of favor, these people will surely fall into trouble and leave no room for it. When Ye Zhen was frightened and uneasy, Liu's family counseled, "Manny, don't think about it, things may not be so bad. Your Majesty has no heirs now. As long as you give birth to the first prince, you can be promoted to Zhao Zhao. Yi. Your Majesty has petted you for several years. Is his deep affection comparable to others? You must stay steady at this time." Speaking of offspring, Ye Zhen quickly flashed a bit of bitterness in his eyes, but hurriedly covered it, for fear that his mother would see the clue. Lu didn't check, and continued, "Although Zhong is looking at people for Guan Suyi recently, the Queen Mother will soon call a beautiful woman into the palace for selection. This marriage is definitely not going to happen. I plan to come together with your father. A trick to draw a salary from the bottom of the pan will ruin her innocence first." Ye Zhen pondered for a moment and waved his hand, "No. My palace and His Majesty spent 2 years at the border." Although he never guessed what he thought, he knew more or less his way of doing things. He decided to reuse the Guan family and his son. He will definitely send. People are staring at them all the time. If something happens to Guan Suyi at such a critical juncture, Your Majesty will definitely investigate it to the end. Are you sure you can avoid Your Majesty's eyes and ears? Avoid Huo Zhen's eyes and ears? I am afraid that only ghosts and gods dare to answer this sentence. In the world, there are only things he doesn't want or even disdains to know, but there is nothing he can't know. What can I do then? Let Guan Suyi Shun enter the palace right away." Liu's tone was anxious. She must never enter the palace. Ye Zhen closed his eyes fiercely, and was unable to wave his hands when he opened them again. "You go back first, let Dad not act rashly. He is a little Tai Shi Cheng, what big things can he do? He is indeed a low-ranking official, but you are Ms. Jiu anyway. You often blow pillow breeze to the Emperor. Why don't we go up there?" The Lu family wanted to say more, but was invited out by 2 grand ladies. Ye Hao thought for a long time, and finally slowly unrolled a piece of rice paper, and raised a pen to ask someone for help. "Guan Suyi can't enter the palace, so let her marry." She pointed out a rare good marriage in the world, but she was not sure, and she would have to kowtow to her in the future. After making the last stroke, Ye Zhen smiled briskly. After successfully persuading her mother not to rush to see others for herself, Guan Suyi really spent a few days leisurely. On this day, she was sitting in the warm pavilion practicing calligraphy. Maid Minglin walked in with a cotton cloak in her hand. "Miss, the carriage is ready and ready to go. Madam is waiting for you in the lobby." Because Emperor Shang Yuan particularly respected Confucianism, he built a Confucian temple in Mind Mountain in the southern suburbs, and the people who went to worship Confucianism these days were endless. As the masters of the Confucian school, of course, Mr. Guan and Father Guan could not be left behind. They had ordered Zhong to cook the lamb for the sacrifice. The two showed their sincerity. Yin always carried the lantern and went out, preparing to climb the mountain step by step, leaving the mother and daughter behind to ride in the carriage. Guan Suyi put on the big cloak and walked into the blooming snowflakes. Although his feet were relieved, his thoughts kept surging. But with a small change, everything seems to be different. On that day, his grandfather was not so angry that he was sick in bed, nor was he ridiculed because of his lack of speech, or even ruined. Now he is still a leader of the Confucian school, and he is also an admired contemporary writer. My father didn't have to wait by the bedside every day, and eventually got the nickname Turtle with Head Shrunk, and since then he has no place to show himself. Now they make friends with literature and make good connections, so they can live a stable life without being an official. Thinking of the grandfather of the previous life holding the sick body to come to Zhenbei Home Mansion to seek justice for him, he was alive and fainted, remembering that his parents were resolutely unwilling to believe in the slander of the Zhao family. They were so desperate that they wanted to make peace with them. The clan was removed. Guan Suyi's eyes were full of tears when he remembered that his grandparents had come to the other hospital to pick him up and returned to his hometown with abuse. In this life, the humiliation and torture that she shouldn't have to bear has probably gone away. Thinking of this, she quickly blinked away the tears in her eyes and walked towards the smiling Zhong, who was standing under the porch. The mother and daughter got on the Wuopeng carriage and drove slowly towards Minda Mountain. Although the heavy snow is still falling, due to Emperor Shang Yuan's several homages to Confucius, the road has long been flattened by the passing iron riders. There are also labors to clean it every 2 hours, so it is not difficult to walk. At the foot of the mountain, the carriage slowly stopped by the side of the road, and there seemed to be a little girl crying outside. "What's the matter?" Zhong asked through the bamboo curtain. "Madam, I don't know whose carriage broke down. Now it's stuck in the middle of the road. The lady of that family is crying with cold. It's pitiful," the driver said with pity. When Zhong opened the bamboo curtain for a moment, he saw a well-used Upeng carriage parked in front of him. The host was afraid to get out of the car for fear of freezing, but the cries of grievances came from time to time, which was indeed worrying. Zhong Clan was infected by his father and husband, and always used the words "don't do evil for small things, don't do good things without doing things," and then said, "Li Wen, go and help them see how the carriage can be. Will it be repaired? Tao Hong, go and greet you. If there are all female relatives in the car, please invite them to share the ride." At this time, men and women's defenses were not as strict as later generations. It is not uncommon for men and women to share a carriage. That's why Zhong Clan asked this question. Guan Suyi knocked his chin on his mother's shoulder and looked along the gap between the bamboo curtains. He couldn't help but frown. He always felt that the coachman seemed to have seen him somewhere, and he was really familiar with it. Tao Hong, Zhong's maid, ran over, said a few more words, and then a luxuriously dressed middle-aged woman came down with a 12 or 3-year-old girl. The little girl has bright eyes and white teeth, pink face and cheeks, 2 strings of teardrops hanging from the corners of her reddish eyes. The Zhong clan felt his love at a glance, and hurriedly lifted the curtain of the car to call out, "Look at how this little face is frozen, come up and warm it up." He never noticed his daughter's pale complexion instantly. It is strange that the coachman is so familiar, but he turns out to be an old friend. It was only half a breath, Guan Suyi had already gotten away from the abnormality, and calmly watched the 2 people staggering. The middle-aged woman and the little girl climbed into the carriage supported by the pink ground, first worshipped Xie Zongxi, and then looked at Guan Suyi, both eyes radiating amazing light. They are all related to the Zhenbei home mansion, which Guan Suyi avoids. One is Ye Zhen's mother, Lu, and the other is her daughter, Zhao Chengzi. Even if she has passed Guan Suyi's secret observation many times, at close range, Liu's is still captured by her dignified, restrained but refined appearance. If a big man comes in, I am afraid that she will lose her soul at this moment. His Majesty lifted Guan's family so hard to build momentum for her entering the palace. Such a stunner, really can't let her in, otherwise her daughter will have no place to stand. Thinking of this, Liu's and Zhao Chengzi exchanged glances secretly, and then pretended to be grateful and approached the Zhongs. Guan Suyi had looked down on everything in her previous life, so she will naturally not be disturbed by old people and things in her life. She stretched out her hand, poured 2 cups of hot tea slowly, and whispered softly, "2 please." All of them came up, and she would not push people down for no reason. The girl wore the most pure blue dress. The wide sleeves were slightly raised to reveal half of the slender, snow-white wrists. There were no gold, silver, and jade ornaments on them, but they were gorgeous enough. This gorgeousness was penetrated by flesh and blood, like Tao Yao. Xing Feng, shocking, no wonder the world says beauties are in the bones but not in the skin, but this is the truth. And her clear and mellow voice inherently contains a hint of tenderness and honey. It's fine when she speaks normally. If she deliberately lowers her softness as she does now, it will be hard for women like Lu and Zhao Chengzi to resist. The 2 touched the numb oracles, and then raised their tea cups to thank them, and a sharp glow appeared in their eyes as they sipped. Guan Suyi had already noticed abnormalities in their speech and behavior, and could not help but secretly speculate about their intentions. With the power of the Zhenbihou mansion, how could the concubines ride in the Wuopeng carriage exclusively for the common people? She remembered that Zhao Chengzi had a carriage decorated with gold powder and vermilion lacquer, which was especially public when he passed the market. As it is now, he only said that his surname was Zhao and never mentioned the word Zhenbihou, which seemed to have deliberately hidden his identity. What does she want to do? Guan Suyi felt naive while dealing with Zhao Chengzi, but if he was inquiring about the truth, he arrived at the Confucian temple without realizing it. A man with a long stature and noble temperament has received a letter from his servant, standing by the door with an umbrella waiting, his face full of concern. Seeing the carriage slowly stopped, he stepped forward to help his daughter and mother-in-law, and finally thanked Zhong through the curtain of the car. Seeing the handsome and innocent face of the man, Zhong's feelings were overwhelmed, and he even said that it was not worth it, and it went so far as to say. Guan Suyi had already put on the power fence, followed his mother to get out of the car leisurely, and then nodded at the man slightly. The moment she met Zhao Chengzi, she knew that Zhao Lulai must be in the Confucian temple. The children of Zhao Wangshu and Zhao Chengzi are the lifeblood of Zhao Lulai, and they will feel distressed for a long time if they lose a bit of hair. How can they let them go out alone? Her marriage with this person has never been foreshadowed by deep feelings. Even if the heart moved, it was only a moment, and then it was obliterated by various misunderstandings and humiliations. Goodbye in this life, Guan Suyi has no love or hatred for him, so she can face it calmly. However, the enthusiastic Zhong clan started talking with Zhao Lulai, and thus learned of his prominent status as Zhenbihou. The local women have seen Lord Ho, it is nothing more than a matter of hand, Lord Ho does not have to worry about him, the worship ceremony is about to begin, and the women of the people are one step ahead. Zhong's enthusiasm immediately faded, and he bowed his knees and wanted to leave. Guan Suyi didn't speak from beginning to end, and she couldn't see her expression clearly through mealy, but from her frequent movements to the front door, she could see her eagerness to leave. The unusual reaction of the two surprised Lu and Zhao Chengzi. They thought that after seeing Zhao Lulai, the Guan family's mother and daughter would surely entangle them to the ground, but they were so disgusted. You must know that Zhao Lulai is not only a high-ranking man, but also a well-known beautiful man. Even if he continues, there are many women in the prime of life who are willing to start, and even the noble ladies of the clan flock to him. Why are the mother and daughter of the Guan family indifferent? Zhao Chengzi, who was originally worried that Guan Suyi's marriage into the Zhenbihou mansion would harm her own interests, has now changed from hesitation to annoyance. After the two walked away, she took her father's arm and praised Guan Suyi very much. Lu also beat the drum, and bluntly said that her granddaughter was getting older and that she should find a mistress to marry her so that she would not be looked down upon. But the grandson was still young and needed the care of her mother. Zhao Lulai regarded his children as life, lest they be wronged the slightest, thinking about their daughter's marriage, and remembering the son who was always clamoring for his mother, he was finally moved. He presided over the ceremony to worship Confucius throughout the whole process. Mr. Guan's reputation among scholars has reached the limit. After returning home from the mountain, guests come to visit every day, and there is an endless stream of horse-drawn carriages. Since the coincident encounter between Lu and Zhao Chengzi, Guan Suyi has a vague premonition. She is somewhat resistant to the marriage, but is uncharacteristically positive. However, the candidate has not yet been selected, and the matchmaker sent by the Zhenbei Haofu has already come with a generous gift, and even the Lu family has come several times to intercede for the former son-in-law. Fortunately, the Guan family was not the one who tended to follow the flames, and categorically rejected it on the grounds of improper households. The matchmaker and Lu tried their best to persuade them to no avail, so they had to turn around angrily and let Guan Suyi let go. But the matter was not over yet. The news of the rejection of the marriage caused Zhao Chengzi to cry in sorrow, and immediately led his younger brother to kneel in front of his father's study and refused to get up. She looked for Guan Suyi, and refused to listen to anyone's advice, and Zhao Wangshu desperately wanted a gentle and kind mother under her instigation. Zhao Lulai couldn't figure out what magic power Guan Suyi had, so that her daughter could not forget her. Even though he was rejected, he would not force it, but he could not hold back the ardent and sad disappointed eyes of a pair of sons and daughters. Even his mother-in-law Lu also praised Guan Suyi, saying that it would be better to give her 2 grandsons to her than to anyone else. Rest assured. Zhao Lulai was ashamed of the deceased wife and was about to send someone a letter to ask her for her opinions. After going back and forth, Zhao Lulai finally made up his mind and went to the palace to ask for an order. And because of all kinds of unspeakable entanglements, although he was in a high position after the founding of the country, he had no real power and rarely visited the affairs of the court. Therefore, he did not know that Guan Suyi had been appointed by the Emperor Sheng Yuan and would enter the palace soon. For the concubine. In the Viang Palace, Huo Zhenj sat on a soft chair with a golden sword, piled a lot of Confucian classics on his hand. From the curled side pages, it can be seen that he has read it many times. He seemed to be incomprehensible to some parts of the book, his brows frowned and he tightened, and his firm and stern face showed a little irritable color. Bai Fuchen wanted to persuade him to take a sip of hot tea, and relax, and there was a notification from Xia Huangman outside the hall, saying that it was Zhen Beiho begging to see him. Chen Guang? Really a rare visitor. Announcing him to come in. Huo Zhenj put down his book, and the sword eyebrows that flew diagonally into the temple slightly raised. Since Ye Zhen was sent to him, this former comrade in arms hadn't communicated with him for a long time, and even Feng Zhenbihou was unwilling to participate in the court meeting, as if he was evading everything in the past. Of course, Huo Zhenj could understand his feelings. As a man, it was indeed a shame. Zhao Lulai walked into the hall cautiously, and then bowed respectfully, his eyes always drooping, and he did not dare to look directly at the holy face. Just looking at his horrified appearance, no one could imagine that he and the man on the dragon chair were once confidants who talked about everything, and they trusted each other with their lives on the battlefield. Long time no see, don't come here unharmed. After a long silence, Huo Zhenj spoke first. Zhao Lulai hurriedly replied, because his voice was too low, even Huo Zhenj, who had a deep inner strength, could not hear clearly for a while. It was only after a moment of recollection that he realized that he was saying everything is well. A generation of generals who had fought bravely on the battlefield to kill the enemy and strategized, did not know when they turned into this cowardly and dull appearance. Huo Zhenj was quite contemptuous of this, even more pressing that he didn't even have the courage to protect his own woman. Slowly, the feeling of fellowship faded. Everything does not go to the Palace of Three Treasures. You finally enter the palace once, must you have something to ask me? With nothing to say, Huo Zhenj simply pointed out. Zhao Lulai struggled, and resentment surged in his heart. But he didn't dare to let this person notice the slightest abnormality, and pressed the already drooping head again, and said with difficulty, I want to tell the emperor, the minister of the imperial court wants to ask you for a marriage decree this time. Oh? You want to continue? Huo Zhenj was very surprised, which young lady is so expensive that you are willing to come to me? In order to satisfy the wishes of his children, Zhao Lu dared to break through the mountains and flames, let alone endure some humiliation? He settled down and replied, enlightened to the emperor, and the minister wants to marry old Master Guan's granddaughter Guan Suyi. Although her family is not prominent, she is better than her character, pure and good temperament, and she wants to be determined. Can bear the responsibility of the Zhao family's wife. The family background is not prominent. Hearing this, Huo Zhenj stroked the jade fingers on his hand, and his eyes flashed with a smile. If it weren't for the person in front of him to be Zhao Lulai who doesn't care about the world, he really wants to suspect that the other person is pretending to be stupid. The Guan family is precisely the benchmark for his promotion of Confucianism, and it will certainly be elevated in the future. It is not enough to give officials. If there are girls of the right age in the family, they will also be included in the palace and give Long En a grand favor. In this way, the people of the world can see clearly how the sage admires Confucianism, and how the study of Confucianism can make progress. The prosperity of the world is for profit, and the hustle and bustle of the world is for profit. Driven by huge interests, within 3 years, Confucianism will surely become Kuoxiu, while other theories will gradually fade out of people's field of vision. But at the moment, Zhao Lulai wanted to cut off Huo Zhen's predetermined vice-queen in a few words, which can be said to be rebellious. The hall was quiet for a while, not to mention that the palace people were terrified, and even Bai Fu was sweating coldly. If it hadn't been known that Zhenbihu never asked about the court affairs, he would have suspected that this was the enemy's revenge for his wife's vengeance. Huo Zhen fixedly looked at Zhao Lulai for a while, and finally smiled lightly. You have a fellowship with me, how can I not grant this will? Beifu, rub the ink for me. Your Majesty, why did you agree? Miss Guan is your default Zaiyi Empress. Bai Fu's expression was stupefied for a moment and then quickly converged, and he hurriedly stepped forward to rub the ink. Zhao Lulai breathed a sigh of relief. After the imperial decree was promulgated, he thanked the Holy Grace and returned home to his children. Why would he look at Guan Sui? Huo Zhenj asked, staring at the man's back. A deceased man appeared out of thin air, half kneeling and arching his hands. Report to the emperor, Miss Zhao went to worship Kong Sheng. On that day, because of the carriage damage and unfortunately trapped at the foot of the mountain, she happened to meet the mother and daughter of the Guan family passing by, so she took her up together. Therefore, Ms. Zhao met Ms. Guan at first sight and clamored for her to be a mother. Zhenbihu couldn't, so she had to go to the door to propose a marriage and was rejected by the Guan family. Then she entered the palace for an order. Huo Zhenj waved back the dead soldier, looking down and pondering. Miss Zhao, who was the daughter Zhao Chengzi left by Ye Zhen back then, should be 13 years old even if she counts her days. Without the upbringing and supervision of the mistress, marriage would be a bit difficult. There is nothing wrong with her eagerness to find a stepmother, but is it really a so-called coincidence to choose Guan Sui? Huo Zhenj walked to the window and looked in the direction of Ganquan Palace, shook his head and laughed. Coincidence is not a coincidence. He has no intention of pursuing it. Since Chen Guang deliberately breaks free from the past, why can't he make it perfect? After all, he was ashamed of those two people back then, so that their husband and wife were separated. Now that the family and the country are unified, the universe has changed, it is time to look forward. At the same time, Zhong and Guan Sui are hosting several family members at home. One of them is the wife of Guan Yunkai's cousin. It is best to inquire about the news on weekdays. I heard that the Guan family had rejected Zhenbihu's proposal and immediately came to be a lobbyist. Brother-sister, you are so stupid that you even rejected the marriage of Zhenbihu. If you missed this village, there will be no more shop. Who is Zhenbihu? Maybe you just came to Yanjing. Understand, let me talk to you. She grabbed a handful of melon seeds and talked eloquently. Zhenbihu was the son of a great minister in the former dynasty. Because his father was wronged, he was sent to the frontier by the emperor of the former dynasty. There, he accidentally got acquainted with the current emperor and became an irreverent friend. Then he followed him in the north and south and made great contributions. His current title is all based on military exploits. It can be said that he is both civil and military and handsome. Another high-powered, handsome-looking man, he is also a widower, and there are a pair of children under him. My Yi will not be a stepmother, let alone a stepmother. Zhong cried his lips. What's wrong with the widower? The widower is enough for our family. The cousin spit out a few pieces of melon seeds, and said anxiously, he and the emperor have a relationship with the emperor, and he lived and died together in the first battle of the river. The general Dang Cao, now guarding the border, has a bright future. Isn't this double outstanding enough? Besides, his wife's clan is even more important. Ye Zhen, the twin sister of the deceased wife, has a life-saving grace to the emperor. Jiyu, 2 more steps are Zaiyi and the queen. Who doesn't know that Ye Jiyu loves her sister's children so much that she always awards great rewards and takes care of them everywhere. As long as we Yi take good care of them, we are not afraid of being in Ho. The mansion can't stand firm. 2.5-year-old children, who have not been loved by their mothers since childhood, should be coaxed very well. Yu Bingxiu is smart, knowledgeable, and reasonable, and will be able to cope with it. Zhong's expression became more and more disgusting, and he was about to retort, but Guan Suyi, who had been silent all the time, said slowly, "So my aunt, you also know that if you want to stand firm in the home mansion, you have to take care of the 2 children. I am going to be the master." "Mother, still go to be a maidservant? Who knows that Master Zhao Ho is infatuated with his deceased wife, and loves his children like his life. At this time, I will continue to consider the future marriage of his daughter Zhao Chengzi. What status can the married woman have? The past will be lost. In the future, I will be alone in my empty boudoir, and my misery will be unspeakable. Besides, it was originally the Zhao family's wife, why should the Ye family come to see me? Will I be ruled by a dead person everywhere in the future? If you like it, leave it to your daughter." "Twin sister?" Guan Suyi lowered her eyes and sneered, Ye Zhen, these 2 names are good, and there is no fear that the insider will make a mistake. The twins are better to find an excuse, and they completely avoid the point of admitting mistakes, and really cover up the bad things in the past. Be strict. She didn't want to explore how Ye Zhen fell into the Yellow River to suspend an escape, and she didn't want to know how she changed her name to the superior Ye Jiu. She just wanted to stay away from the Zhao family's house of male thieves and female prostitutes. Fortunately, her parents and grandfather love her very much. As long as she doesn't, this marriage will not be possible. Zhao Lulai's self-esteem is so strong that he will not come back after being rejected several times. At first, she would not easily agree if it weren't for marrying into Zhenbihu's mansion to rescue the Guan family trapped in fire and water. The so-called prosperous, rich, and beautiful clothes have never been her heart's desire. The woman was a little annoyed after being confronted, and was about to scold a few words. Zhong immediately said, "My husband and father are both white and low-minded, so I dare not marry my daughter into such a high-end house. Sister-in-law, brothers and sisters, please come back. I have been feeling cold recently and have a splitting headache, so I won't stay too much." The concubines stood up angrily and left one after another. Just at this moment, a little yellow door arrived with the imperial decree of marriage, shaking Guan's house up and down, especially Guan Suyi, who was dumbfounded for a while before slowly kneeling down, and his hands trembled when receiving the decree. The skin is cold. Is this fate? In this life, even if she couldn't get along, Zhao Lulai would still have a way to push her into the fire pit. For a moment, Guan Suyi began to doubt the meaning of rebirth, and even lost all thoughts, and his heart was like a dead wood. But soon, she broke free from the pain of suffocation and became firm and strong. Good. Very good. It's better to marry into the Zhao family than to marry someone who doesn't know the foundation. This world is inherently difficult for women. Whether it is a merchant, a farmer, or a noble scholar, with the wealth of wealth, they will keep taking concubines at home. This is the normal state of men in the world, and it is inevitable. Instead of going through the journey from joy and hope to despair and numbness in the future, it is better to sit on the sidelines from the beginning. The reason why she failed in her last life was precisely because she did too much and said too little, which made those people think that everything she gave was justified. In this life, she decided to just say nothing, put on the hypocritical face of a virtuous wife and mother, and strive for the reputation of a virtuous woman, but to see what else the Zhao family could produce without her efforts, and what she would yield. Luscious fruit. While thinking, Guan Suyi grabbed the Ming Huang imperial edict in his hand and smiled sarcastically. The people of the Guan clan originally thought that the marriage between Guan Suyi and Zhenbihou was ruined, but the emperor directly ordered the marriage to be granted. This is a great glory, for people who are ecstatic for a while, and people who are uneasy. There are also people who hate hardship. But everyone didn't dare to reveal their true inner thoughts, and they all put on a happy appearance and ran to Master Guan. Due to the tight urgency of the Zhenbihou mansion, the wedding date was set in the middle of the next month, so that the Zhong clan was so anxious that he was full of blisters in the night. The Guan family was originally a family of farming and studying, and there was quite a bit of land in Yuanping's hometown, but the old man Guan insisted on going to Yanjing, and Zhong had to sell the land to raise money. He had spent 7 or 88s along the way. There is not much left. If the daughter is married to an ordinary family, there is still time to prepare, but Zhenbihou mansion is a noble and powerful, so she won't be able to see enough of the things in her hand. For this reason, Father Guan and Father Guan emptied their private treasury and handed them over to the Zhong clan, and even the mother clan who was far away in Yuanping also entrusted a lot of belongings with others. Even so, wanting to let her daughter marry gracefully, but still a big gap. Especially after the door, there is a custom of drawing dowry. The guests invited by the Zhenbihou must have extraordinary backgrounds. Will it be even more despise for their daughters? Will my daughter have a firm foothold in her in-laws in the future? The more he thought about it, the more troubled it was to sleep and eat. In just a few days, his hair was bleached, but Guan Suyi still wandered freely. He didn't care about it, he should eat, sleep, and his spirits were better than before. Fortunately, the Guan clan had strict rules, and the hearts of the people gathered, and one after another sent them to add makeup, which slightly eased the predicament of the Zhong clan. Brother and sister, we have married Yi into the home mansion, but it's a high climb. Please take the time to teach her a little bit of rules, so as not to be embarrassed. It is also her fate. She burned Gao Xiang in her previous life. Wanda is cautious in words and deeds, courteous and humble. If you still bludgeon the elders like the last time, you can't say that one day you will be out of your wife. The second aunt who was hit by Guan Suyi last time said bitterly. Although the woman at this time has not been constrained by the extreme chastity of later generations, and there are no lack of powerful people, but among the common people, their status is not high. If a man dislikes his wife, he can go out without any reason, and he does not need to return his dowry. This is wife leaving. It sounds a bit miserable. Women who are wife will be ridiculed by their neighbors, but it is only for a while. It is not difficult to find someone to remarry after the storm has subsided, and everyone will not always hold on to the past. However, after Su's Neo-Confucianism became popular, the so-called 7 outs and 7 outs came into being. It sounded like protecting women's rights, and stipulating that the dowry belonged to the woman, and the man could not use it, but it was only for the man's sorrow. Bo Xing put on a coat of compassion, but actually blamed all the faults on the women, which made their situation even more difficult. In-laws disliked, divorced their wives, had no children and divorced their wives, prevented the husband from accepting concubines and divorced his wives, used the husband's property without authorization and divorced his wives, talked a few more gossips and divorced his wives. Since then, the woman has completely become an object, fiddle with it when you like it, and throw it away when you dislike it, but the woman is not responsible for all kinds of guilt, but she has to bear it alone. What is even more frightening is that after being abandoned, they will endure a lifetime of contempt and abuse. Not to mention remarrying, or self-defeating will not be relieved. As for their dowry, only a few people can return, and most of the rest are taken over by their husbands on the grounds of raising children. Speaking of wife out, Guan Suyi's hand copying the dowry list stopped, and a pair of dark and deep eyes fixedly looked at the second aunt. Zhong was also extremely angry, and scolded, "Sister-in-law, Yi hasn't gotten married, so you just give it out one by one. You are too much. She comes from a scholarly family and is not good at swearing." The second aunt was pulled a few times by several concubines, and she became more annoyed. Isn't I right? Look at your house made of broken logs, and look at the magnificent Genbeiho mansion. I haven't seen Yi. When you pass away, don't be too shocked to walk as soon as you cross the threshold, you will be ashamed by then. Inexplicably climbing up to the in-laws of Biho mansion in Genbei, the Zhong clan was also dizzy, but worried that his daughter would be fascinated by the wealth of the home mansion for a while and behave inappropriately. Especially if such a high-ranking figure like Lord Ho is really disgusted if he is not served well, how can she be able to stand up for her daughter? The more he thought about it, the more he became more afraid, his face changed involuntarily. The second aunt snorted coldly when she saw it. She looked like a little person and her jealousy disappeared by half. The other concubines frequently winked at her and told her not to offend others too much. No matter how humble Guan Suyi's background is, his appearance is there. As long as Lord Zhao Ho is a normal man, there is no one who doesn't love it. When she will be favored in the future, is it not a matter of supporting the tribe? The second aunt also slowly recalled. While coughing, she wanted to find a step down, but when she saw Guan Suyi who was stunned, she suddenly smiled, and copied the dowry list again, but her handwriting was more slick than before. My aunt said that I closed the house in a humble manner, but I was not convinced by that. If there is no imperial marriage decree from the emperor, in a few days, let alone the home mansion, even the clan, I will get married. She rolled up her sleeves and said. Slightly dipped the ink in the ink's tone, and continued, whoever climbed the other side, you can't say that. In this life, my grandfather is in good health and his father is full of spirits. The two of them leave early and return late, and their reputations are rising steadily. And Su Guangji, who should have gained a reputation, has yet to find a chance to rise above others. In the previous life, Emperor Sheng Yuan would focus on promoting representatives of the Confucian school, and he would naturally also in this life, but after counting, Guan Suyi could not find a better candidate than his grandfather and father. Isn't this sudden marriage gift the best proof? Unlike her daughter's determination, Zhong doesn't have much thoughts about the future of the Guan family, and it is enough to just eat and wear warmth. Seeing the ironic expressions of the concubines, she was about to return her daughter's ostentatious remarks, but the anxious voice of the maidservant came from outside. Madam, Miss, hurry up and dress up. Someone from the palace gave an decree. After a period of turmoil, the people of the Guan family finally successfully took over the imperial decree, and the old man Guan was awarded the title of emperor, and his position was better than the prime minister. The father and son were extremely ministers overnight, and they also raised the Guan family a lot. Now if anyone talks about the Guan families climbing up to the Genbeiho mansion, that would be a joke. Genbeiho had no real power except for one title, while the Guan family and his son had to teach the saints to study and the Pope's disciples to study. They were called the emperor's close ministers, and a single word was more important than ordinary officials. The complexions of all the concubines who had avoided the side room were so blue and white, especially the second aunt, shaking like sifting chaff, and the last bit of hatred in their hearts disappeared completely. That's how people are. When you meet someone stronger than yourself, you can't help being jealous. When you meet someone stronger than yourself and hard to reach, you don't have any thoughts. After the palace decree left, they went out trembling and saying goodbye tremblingly. They only hated that the gift they brought was too thin, and their relationship with the Guan family was weakened, and they must make up for it in the future. The Zhong family was overjoyed, where he could take care of others, put his hands together and bowed to the sky. Thank you Bodhisattva for your blessing. Husband and grandfather won official positions. Yi is not afraid of being bullied by her husband. After all, glory and wealth are not as important as daughters. Although Father Guan and Father Guan are full of ambitions, what they most remember is the lifelong happiness of their daughter, and they sighed that this imperial decree came in time. Looking at the rejoicing family, Guan Suyi looked down and smiled sarcastically. Now that her grandfather and father are literary leaders and important ministers, she can't lose their face. In this life, she didn't intend to have another entanglement with Zhao Lulai, and those who had lost her in the past did not need to hold back. Just because of a little bit of hatred from the world, she made herself filthy again, and she couldn't do this kind of thing that didn't pay off. But since Zhao Lulai insisted on pulling her down the quagmire, don't blame her for digging holes and burying people. Guan Suyi, who was somewhat disheartened, suddenly looked forward to the wedding in January. Time flies quickly, and the wedding date soon arrived. When Guan Suyi stepped onto the sedan chair with a sly smile, someone in Ganquan Palace fell ill. After hearing the news, Huo Zhenj rushed to him, picked up the bowl with his own hands, and gave medicine to the angry person. So many years have passed, are you still thinking about him? This sentence was full of sighs and helplessness. Ye Zhen smiled miserably, and finally opened the dressing box, took out a wood-carved magnolia hairpin and gave it to the Grand Palace lady, and said, "Give it back to Lord Ho. Tell him that he must go, and how will he go? If the mountain flower is full of heads, don't ask the slave to return." The words fell in tears. Huo Zhenj put down the bowl and said coldly, "How do you go? Why, don't you treat this Ganquan Palace as a cage?" Ye Zhen smiled bitterly without answering, his expression sad. Huo Zhenj decided to watch her for a long time before sighing, "Since he has remarried, you should let go. In the future, I will take good care of you." Then he patted the woman's thin shoulder. It took Ye Zhen a lot of effort to press down the corners of his mouth that was about to rise. This sentence was similar to a promise. She waited for 6 years. If she knew that Zhao Lulai could get the emperor's closeness by marrying his wife, why should she hold on to Zhenbei Home Mansion? However, Zhao Lulai obeyed her words and obeyed her all the way. After all, there was some usefulness, and she couldn't let go of her hand. "Guan Suyi, even if you are beautiful, you can't stand the guilt that the emperor feels towards Zhao Lulai and me. The wealth in the palace has no relationship with you. I hope you are satisfied with the marriage that I carefully selected for you." Thinking of this, Ye Zhen hurriedly covered his mouth and coughed, lest the viciousness and pride in his eyes would be noticed by the emperor. At the same time, Master Zhao Ho, wearing a big red robe, was full of pain. He held the magnolia flower hairpin, not daring to use force, for fear of pinching it off, and not daring to let go, for fear of losing it. His mind kept pulling. The Grand Palace lady who gave the hairpin secretly stuffed a note into his palm, and then went back to her life. Ye Jiu, who deserves to be the favorite of the 6th house, dared to openly deliver news to her ex-husband in front of Huo Zhenj, without incurring the slightest suspicion. "You have to go, how can you go? If the mountain flowers are full of heads, don't ask where the slaves go." In the study, Zhao Lulai repeated these words, his face was full of tears. He stroked the rough-cut magnolia hairpin with trembling hands, and his wife's delicate face and affectionate smile appeared in front of him. Suddenly, the smile turned into resentment and sorrow, as if accusing him of cowardice and incompetence. Zhao Liu felt a pain in his centrifugation and never dared to recall the past. He wanted to put the hairpin in the secret compartment in the drawer but was reluctant to put it in a sleeve pocket and keep it next to him. Thinking of the note sent by the palace lady, he showed a look of struggling and eagerness on his face, as if afraid of unfeeling words written in it, and afraid that the words that his wife finally handed out would be missed by himself. Without thinking about it for long, he has slowly and carefully unfolded the note. The first sentence made him painful and regretful, and it was difficult to hold on to himself. "Love Lang Chen Guang, see the letter as well. The day before yesterday, my mother told me that XIER was close to the flower letter. Suddenly I realized that time was passing by, and the years were ruthless. In a blink of an eye, it was a vicissitudes of life and cannot be recalled. XIER's wedding still needs the mistress and mother-in-law. I misunderstood me deeply, I was afraid of it, and in desperation, I can only agree with you to continue marrying. Wang Shu is young and needs the care of his mother. I only hate me for my low temperament. As a child, I wished you to forget the past and move forward. However, the wedding date is just around the corner, and my heartache is unbearable. Back then, I never forgot or did not dare to forget the vows. Are you with my heart? With a few hundred words, Zhao Lulai read and read, and his heart was momentarily joyful, momentary regretful, momentary love surged, and his expression on his face became extremely twisted and tangled. When he was immersed in the endless thoughts, he did not notice that his daughter had been standing at the door for a long time. She came and left quietly, walked to Suwoman and said softly, "Give my dad a pot of hot water to wipe his face, and put on his eyes by the way. Today is his happy day, don't let the Guan family see it." He used to cry. The servant in charge of guarding the study repeatedly promised and went down quietly. Thinking of the suddenly wealthy Guan family, Zhao Chengzi's expression darkened. I thought that this time I could get rid of a strong enemy for my mother and find a puppet for myself that would be able to control the Zhenbihou mansion, but he didn't expect that the emperor would suddenly reuse the Guan family and his son, disrupting her overall plan. With a strong backing, it will not be so easy to use Guan Suyi later. But soon, she laughed in a low voice. What about the peerless allure? What if you are full of talents? After all, it is no match for the charm of the mother. Even if you enter the palace and become the emperor's person, as long as your mother passes a few words casually, you will be able to make your father die. I don't know what my mother wrote in the letter, but Guan Suyi will not let Guan Suyi live in the home mansion anyway. Let's go, it's time to set up the wedding banquet. That old thing seems to be very happy today. I don't know if she can laugh out in a few days. Zhao Chengzi walked 2 steps quickly, with a harsh tone. The maid knew that the old thing she was talking about was not someone else, but her grandmother, son, so she didn't dare to answer the conversation, she just pretended not to hear anything, and bowed her head to lead the way. When the maid returned to the palace, the emperor had not left, so she had to hold back her full stomach. Ye Zhen seemed to want to hold her to ask about Zhao Lulai's situation, but he withdrew it in time as soon as he stretched out his hand, and instead squeezed the bedding tightly, eyes full of sad tears. Huo Zhenj saw that her eyelids were drooping, her complexion was pale, and her eyebrows were left with a few fine lines due to years of sorrow, and her weak body seemed to collapse at any time, so she finally asked for her, "Have you ever asked you to speak?" The Grand Palace lady quickly knelt down and replied, "Enjoy the emperor, give her the mother, and Lord Ho just said let her take care of her. Is it over?" Ye Hao asked eagerly, as if realizing something was wrong, he glanced at the emperor with a nervous look. Huo Zhenj didn't care, and covered her big hand on the back of her cold hand, which was full of veins, and gently stroked it a few times. This is a very common gesture that represents comfort and care, but Ye Zhen is ecstatic. She barely suppressed the boiling joy, but she just wanted to put on the look of feeling trapped and heartbroken. Her facial features were twisted and tangled, and she seemed to care about Zhao Haoyi extremely. The Grand Palace lady sighed that her maiden was too pretended, and shook her head and said, "Enjoy your mother, it's gone." Ye Zhen seemed to have exhausted all his strength, his leaning body suddenly fell back on the soft pillow, his eyes were looking directly at the bed curtain above his head, and he couldn't recover for a long time. Between the opening and closing of his eyelids, big tears fell and touched. Wet placket and bedding. Huo Zhenj had never comforted a woman, waved to Beifu, and the attendant handed over a black handkerchief. "Don't cry. You are already weak due to the remaining poison. If you are too worried, you may get worse. Now he has remarried, and you have entered the palace, so you will be well, don't worry about it anymore." Passing the veil over while speaking, Ye Zhen held the handkerchief with trembling fingertips, seemingly dangling his head and wiping tears, very miserable, but in fact the corners of his mouth rose, and his heart jumped for joy. "Everyone is well, don't worry about it anymore. Is this your Majesty's decision to put aside the unbearable past and live with her? Although there is no shortage of women around your Majesty, there are only a few who have been lucky enough, and the only one who can talk to him is only himself. Ye Zhen knew that once he figured it out and put it aside, His Majesty would accept her and even pet her alone. She has never been a fan of Jiu, she wants the sincerity of Her Majesty, and then the world. Knowing that the other party doesn't like crying women, Ye Zhen calmed down after wiping tears for a while, and said in a dumb voice, "The concubine is all right, Your Majesty, if you have government affairs to be busy, please go back first." The stronger she pretended to be, the more worried Huo Zhenj felt. He caught a glimpse of a lot of books on the bedside table, then took out one and said, "I'm fine. You are also tired. Sleep for a while. I sit here to accompany you. When you wake up, I will have dinner with you." Where could Ye Zhen sleep? He wanted to tell him right away, but he knew that he shouldn't be rushed, so he smiled bitterly and shook his head. "The concubine can't sleep, so I'll accompany you to read a book. Reading is good for calming the mind, and being calm is nothing. I thought about it." Huo Zhen showed compassion, but he didn't know how to comfort him. He flipped through the book in his hand and changed the subject and said, "Are you also reading the Analects? What, have you ever felt?" Ye Zhen reluctantly squeezed out a smile. No wonder the emperor named the old master as a saint and praised him as a master of the world. After reading the Analects, he learned that there are such noble characters in the world. He said in one paragraph, if his old man is still there, he will definitely help His Majesty to settle down and help the people. Look at this sentence: if you are useful to me, it is only a month and a success in 3 years. What kind of mind and courage should be let this rhetoric be heard? Mencius's satisfaction will benefit the world, and the poor will benefit the world, gaining will and benefiting the people, unwilling, self-cultivation can be seen in the world, and his way of being a person and living in the world is really admirable and even more thought-provoking. The concubine has been upset recently, but after reading the works of the two saints, she gradually feels that the world is vast, her body is small, a little annoying, and she is really not enough. At the end, she smiled shyly, and the haze disappeared from her body. Bai Fu nodded secretly after hearing this. No wonder the emperor's favorite came to Ganquan Palace. Among all the empresses, Ye Zhe was the only one who was knowledgeable and brilliant, and could talk to His Majesty. The so-called Zhe Hua is probably like this. However, Huo Zhen's reaction was different from what the two expected. He was not evoked to talk, but instead put down the book, with a slightly perfunctory tone. "Unfortunately, I don't have the blessing to listen to the teachings of the saint with my own ears. I still have a book that has not been approved. Sleep for a while and don't think about it anymore. I let the imperial doctor order stay in the Ganquan Palace. If you feel unwell, you can call him immediately." Ye Zhen really wanted to hold the other person, but he didn't dare to make any trouble. He had to promise and wait until the group of people walked away before looking at the Grand Palace. "Lady Sui, is this palace saying something wrong?" Sui thought for a long time, and shook her head determinedly. "Kiss, maid, the servant didn't think you said something wrong, maybe Your Majesty is really busy." Ye Zhen also looked down and thought, and nodded in relief after a long while. In any case, she is finally out of her head now. As long as she is careful in her words and deeds, and step by step, one day she will be able to overlook the world side by side with the emperor. And those who stand in her way will eventually become the dust that has been wiped out in the long river of years. Guan Ziyi got off the sedan chair, stepped over the brazier, worshipped the high hall, and led into the bridal chamber. Zhao Lulai lifted the hijab under the playfulness of a female family. The two quickly looked at each other, and then both looked down, as if they were very shy. Everyone was photographed by the bride's gorgeous glory, and because of the wealth of the other side's family, Long En was prosperous, so he didn't dare to make trouble, and said goodbye after only a few auspicious words. Within a short time, the news that Guan's daughter was a peerless beauty spread, aroused the envy of others. Zhao Lulai didn't expect the new wife to be so outstanding. She wore a bright red wedding gown and a dazzling flower crown, and her skin became more and more condensed, and her hair was like piles of snow. Her wonderful eyes were gleaming and deep and unpredictable. When she looked over, she almost lost his soul. Suck in. He had to look away quickly, like a prey eager to escape from a trap. If you are hungry, you can eat something to cushion your stomach. I'll go to treat you and come later. He urged hardly, and he hurried away. Guan Suyi didn't answer, and waited for people to walk away before raising her head, taking off the Kerala and jewelry with an indifferent expression. The memories of the previous life deliberately dusted up, after being stimulated by the same scenes and characters, come in endlessly. In the last big wedding, Zhao Lulai was so evasive after lifting his hijab, behaved in a flustered manner, but there were also completely different things. For example, he didn't say a little thoughtful word to her, and he left without giving a decent reason, leaving her alone to wait for the dawn, leaving her weeping silently in embarrassment and fear. Power is really easy to use. Is the treatment different because of different identities? As the grandson of the emperor teacher and the daughter of Taekang, even if she does her own way as Zhao Lulai, she can't wait for herself. Guan Suyi shook his head and laughed sarcastically, and finally looked down to think about how to spend the night in the bridal chamber. Zhao Lulai would never dare to leave her alone this time, but this was exactly what she didn't want. The filth that has been thrown away in the last life, how can there be any reason to pick it up in this life? In the previous life, because of his grandfather's ruin and his father's hopelessness in becoming an official, Guan's family had little place in Yanjing, and suddenly he was favored by Zhenbiu and used the courtesy of his wife to raise the door, which greatly eased the family's plight. Guan Suyi's mood is sincere and fearful and like walking on thin ice, for fear that something bad will lead to disgust. After Zhao Lulai left, she sat blankly, even if she was hungry and dizzy, she did not dare to touch the food on the table. She will always remember the confusion and helplessness that suddenly rose from the bottom of her heart when the pale golden warm sun shone on her hungry and cold body the next morning. Since then, she has had a foreboding of her sad and ridiculous second half of her life. And in this life, without the sincerity and fear, without walking on thin ice, and without the hope and expectation of married life, Guan Suyi feels extraordinarily at ease. Taking off the wedding gown, removing the hairpin, and washing off the powder, she sat at the table and ate slowly, and handed out a few dishes for the Zippo and the maid outside the door to eat in the next penthouse. Minglin and Ming Feng also got a snack table, but they didn't dare to move their chopsticks, and entangled, "Miss, you will have a bridal chamber later, don't eat too much. Besides, my uncle sees you eat up all the dishes, I'm afraid I feel you. Guan Suyi interrupted the two with a smile, "What do you think of me? Greedy? Don't worry, your aunt is so heartbroken and won't care about this." Zhao Lulai is the man she has ever seen the most hearted, wearing a bright green hat. On the head, he was not only not ashamed, but proud of it. He is Ye Zhen's dog, telling him to go east and dare not go west, even if he is thrown away at random, he will wait desperately, and when he sees a little bit of hope, he rushes forward desperately. He had exhausted all his affection for Ye Zhen, so he could be vicious to others to the end, even his own flesh and blood, as long as they didn't crawl out of Ye Zhen's belly, they could be killed without hesitation. In this life, Guan Suyi didn't want to get involved with him, but since she was unable to resist, she quickly figured it out. Staying in Zhenbihufu is much more comfortable than being a monk. You don't have to eat vegetarian food, and you don't have to abide by the precepts. On weekdays, you can enjoy flowers, write and read, and you are very free. If you marry an unfamiliar person, you don't know what will happen in the future, but she understands that for her concubine, managing the back home, being jealous, and deceitful things will definitely be indispensable. It's like that for the rest of your life, so it's better not to be born again. One time. It seems that God refuses to let you and me go, then continue to squat in this life. Guan Suyi hooked her lips, her eyes were a little chilly. Ming Lan and Ming Fang knew that their master had been very mindful since they were young, so they didn't dare to persuade them very much, and they ate the food they had eaten with anxiety. After half an hour, the interlacing voices outside gradually disappeared. When they wanted to come to the banquet, it was almost over. They immediately cleaned up the dishes and wiped off the greasy mouth for the master. Guan Suyi's knees closed together, half sitting on the edge of the bed, his hair scattered like a waterfall, his delicate face half hidden in the hair, his lips are reddened and his teeth look brighter. As soon as Zhao Lulifu pushed open the door, what he saw was this scene, and his heart jumped slightly. Everyone has the love of beauty, and even if the infatuation in this life has been paid to one person, he can't deny the excellence of his newlywed wife. The feeling of guilt and regret faded in a flash, and he slowly walked to the bedside, thinking about how to spend the night in the bridal chamber. He once made a heavy oath that no one will take the place of his wife, so Guan Suyi can't touch it, but her family background is no longer what it used to be, so she can't be left out. Thinking of this, Zhao Lulai was in a dilemma. If he were replaced by the humble Guan family who had just entered Yanjing, why he was so annoyed that he would just leave Guan Suyi aside and leave him alone. But now, she has been wronged and related to her father and Guan's father. The two family members must be ugly. So Zhao Lulai held his forehead with his hands, staggered, and decided to pretend to be drunk. Guan Suyi squinted at him, and the corners of her mouth slowly raised. It's okay to pretend to be drunk. If not, she will take him to remember the virtuous, beautiful and innocent First Lady, and tell him to break his heart and run away in embarrassment. In the last life, as long as she mentioned the word Yezhen, Zhao Lulai would always walk away. She still felt wronged at the time, but now she loves this sharp blade that cuts the other's heart. I also don't know what Yezhen looks like, really so dazzling, peerless and graceful? Otherwise, how could Zhao Lulai and Emperor Sheng Yuan be so fascinated that they would not wake up? Guan Suyi suddenly became curious about the Mrs. First who had never met before, and brushed the hair on the side of his cheeks, with a very casual attitude. The corners of Minglan and Ming Fang's blinking eyes were almost cramped and the master didn't see any movement. Then they stepped forward to help the new uncle, and then one helped to change clothes and the other went out to fetch water. Guan Suyi covered her mouth and yawned, ready to go to sleep when Zhao Lulai finished acting. She didn't want to have any physical contact with the other party, because she would feel nauseous, and she didn't want to give birth to a child with half of his blood, because it was a sin. Nothing to rely on or support for the old is not in her consideration. As long as the Guan family can stand upright, she will be able to live comfortably and freely in this life. Zhao Lulai's acting skills are not clever. To prevent exposure, he had to rush to the bed a few steps, fall down and pretend to sleep, and let Minglan and Ming Fang take off their high robes. In embarrassment, he did not realize that his newlywed wife had never cared for a word or helped him. "Miss, my uncle is very drunk, let's go and help him cook a bowl of sober soup," Ming Lan said breathlessly. Ming Fang suddenly robbed him, "It's better to go as a servant girl." The servant girl asked the housekeeper just now to know where the kitchen is going. Her heart thumped and thumped so hard, she never thought that her uncle was such a handsome figure. No wonder the Yanjing ladies called him Young Master's Woyu. Every time he travels, he must throw fruit and make a car. If it can be exchanged for a night of grace, that would be great. Guan Suyi didn't seem to notice Ming Fang's shy and longing look, and waved his hand, "Go." Minglan and Ming Fang get along with each other day and night, naturally knowing her every move, looking at the master, quite a bit hesitant to say something. Guan Suyi half supported her forehead and looked at her, with a playful smile on her face, her white fingertips erected on her lips, and she made a silent gesture. Seeing the young lady's flying eyebrows and the soft lips with a shallow dent pressed by the pink fingernails, Minglan's cheeks were red, and she sighed in her heart, "Only a wonderful person like Miss can match young Master's Woyu, and Ming Fang is too bad. I'm self-reliant." Guan Suyi hugged the bedding on the soft couch by the window, planning to leave it overnight. In the last life, Ming Feng and Minglan failed to accompany her to the end. One attempted to seduce Ho Ye and was killed by Ye Fan and Zhao Chengzi, the other went back to Guan's house to ask for help after being in trouble, but was finally sold by Zhao Lulai. Once again, she did not intend to deal with Ming Feng. An ambitious woman like Guyan Ming Feng could easily hold her hand as a gunman, regardless of whom she would marry. It was unavoidable for her concubine, instead of accepting some unknown origins and temperaments. If it is unpredictable, it is better to hire someone who is easy to control. Facts proved that she was right. When Ye Fan got started, she could easily push Ming Feng and let them bite the dog, and her main house would be quiet. As for Minglan, she must find a good husband for her in this life and marry her gracefully. Minglan knows that her master is most tired of the smell of wine and has a serious cleansing disease. I am afraid that she will not let her uncle get close tonight. But at the moment it was her bridal night, how could she be wasted? She deliberately tried to persuade a few words, but saw her put up her index finger again, pursed her red lips, and hissed inaudibly. Ming Lanjiao blushed and nodded repeatedly. The master and servant were dumbfounded, and Zhao Lulai, who was lying on the bed, felt a little uncomfortable. The two maids served very well, but they never heard the newlyweds say a word, and I don't know what she thought in her heart. Will she be resentful or dissatisfied? If she insists on calling herself up, how should she respond? While thinking, Hexiang's anxious voice came from outside the door. Master Ho is not good, the young lady has a sudden high fever, and she has fainted just now. Go and have a look. The daughter, who is about 8 points similar to his wife, has always been Zhao Lulai's heart, and her love for pets is better than that of his protagonist. At this time, no one can care about getting drunk on top, suddenly turned over and sat up, put on boots, and ran out hastily, put on an outer robe. With a bang, the door that was pushed open bounced back to the door frame, startling Minglan. She stammered as she slapped her chest, "Isn't the uncle drunk and drunk? Why is she acting so agile? Isn't it easy to pretend to be drunk?" Guan Suyi simply tied her hair into a bunch, pinned it with a hairpin, and pointed to the cloak on the hanger. When the two came to Penglay Garden, people entered and exited, and Zhao Chengzi shrank into the thick bedding, with a wet kerchief on his forehead, and his face was flushed abnormally, and he looked extremely weak. Seeing the new lady who suddenly appeared, the servants all over the house showed hostility. On the contrary, Zhao Lulai's expression was very guilty at the thought of pretending to be drunk. "Well, it's so hot. Have you got a doctor?" Guan Suyi went straight to the bed and stroked the bewildered Zhao Chengzi. "Someone has been sent to invite. It should be on the road right now." Zhao Lulai dodged his eyes. Guan Suyi sat down on the bed, took off the slightly hot veil, and replaced it with Zhao Chengzi. An anxious expression appeared on her face, but she smiled slowly in her heart. In different family backgrounds, everything is also different. In the last life, where did Zhao Chengzi need to use this self-destructive method to deal with himself? Inviting her to Penglay Garden only the next morning when she is alone in her emptiness, a few words of comfort will make her grateful. At that time, the Guan family got out of the predicament because of Zhao Lulai's importance. She was only grateful to the Zhao family and had no suspicion. Why would she think of anything else? Looking at it now, the daughter summons her mother to talk in the yard. This is an act of inferiority. Zhao Chengzi never paid attention to her from the beginning to the end, let alone filial piety. It was so stupid that I had pity for her to consider her everywhere. In this life, in order to suppress her famous stepmother, she did not hesitate to make herself ill. I don't know how long the cold wind was blowing for such a high temperature. Thinking of this, a smile flashed in Guan Suyi's eyes. Seeing that these people are not doing well, she feels relieved, and it's worth noting that she endures the nausea and marries in. After changing to a damp and cold veil, Zhao Chengzi was awake for a moment. She tried to open her eyes and saw Guan Suyi's flawless face, and she was taken aback for a while. Guan Ziyi held her hand and asked softly, "Xie, are you better? Mother sees you are here." When the words fell, her throat tightened slightly, and she was disgusted by the word mother. No matter how scheming Zhao Chengzi is, she is only a little girl of 12 and 13. Moreover, she is ill, her brain is already burnt, and she subconsciously shows disgust. Then she shook her head and hid behind, taking advantage of the situation to break away from the other party and hold her tightly. Hands. Guan Ziyi let go of her and chuckled, "It seems Xier is not ready to accept me. It doesn't matter, we will have a long time in Japan." Then he twisted a veil and planned to change it. The maid and the old mother who stood by were already very defensive against her. Seeing that the young lady showed obvious resistance, they hurriedly stepped forward and squeezed her away, earnestly asking the new lady to go back first, so as not to get sick. Zhao Liu was suspicious and felt that her daughter's behavior was not as close to Miss Guanjia as she said. On the contrary, she was a little disgusted. In that case, why did she cry and cry to marry her by herself? However, in his heart, his daughter was right no matter what he did or said. Even if he had doubts in his heart, he quickly left behind and waved his hand to the new wife apologetically, "Husband, you go back first, Xier is very ill. I will stay here to look after her tonight." The phrase "Mrs." could not be said after all. That's all? Not even a word of sorry? This is your wedding night? Guan Ziyi smiled sarcastically in her heart, but on her face she said that it was all right. Thanks to Zhao Chengzi's self-sacrifice, otherwise the big carved jujube branch she brought from home would have been soiled by Zhao Lulai's foul. The two masters and servants walked back slowly carrying the lanterns. As soon as they were discharged from the hospital, they saw a black figure rushing over from the other side of the path and hitting Minglan who was leading, causing her to fall. They didn't say sorry, let alone stop. "Check the situation, the wind has gone far." The servant following him panted and shouted, "Master, slow down and be careful of falling. The eldest lady just has a high fever, just drink a few notes of medicine, and nothing will happen." The voice and the figure quickly faded into the night, making Minglan look dumbfounded. "Miss, that is the son of Hao Fu? How come the Zhao family are all of such turbulent temperament, one running faster than the other? Also, how did the uncle sway before?" Without waking up, he just yelled outside and left. He was really pretending to be drunk? Why? Guan Ziyi gathered the big cloak and smiled lightly. "It is said that the dragon begets the dragon, the phoenix begets the phoenix, and the son born to a mouse will make holes. Master Zayaha slaps his hoof fast, and of course his son is not bad. As for why he pretending to be drunk, maybe it was because he wore the green hat for too long and was reluctant to take it off. In short, he does whatever he likes, regardless of our business." Minglan nodded stupidly at first, and then recollected, "That's not right. What kind of rat, hole, and hoof, young lady, why do you always compare Master Ho to a beast? And what is there about that green hat?" Guan Ziyi poked Xiao's head, and walked back first, "Compared to a beast. You can still praise him. In short, remember that these people in the home mansion are not fuel-efficient lamps. Don't walk too close to them. Sure enough, the high school is not easy to climb. Miss, don't worry, the slave and maid will remember." Minglan replied dully, covering her forehead. At this moment, she could tell that Master Ho didn't care about the young lady at all, and the eldest lady and the son were also full of hostility towards her. "I am afraid that the future will be very difficult." The master and servant returned to the main room. From a distance, they saw Ming Fang standing under the porch with the sober soup, facing the dim candlelight and asked, "Where is my uncle? Master Ho is guarding the eldest lady tonight, and won't be back." Minglan blew out the lantern, her tone slightly sharp. However, Ming Fang was thinking of Zhao Lulai intently, without noticing it, and suddenly raised her voice and asked, "How can he not come back? This is the night of his bridal chamber. His expression was even more irritating than the new lady, until she noticed that Minglan was suspicious. His gaze was busy and rounded. How can my uncle treat the lady like this? If this matter is known to outsiders, you can't watch the lady's jokes. Guan Suyi waved her hand. It's okay, I'm not afraid of people making jokes. As early as when she was sent to Kangzhou in her previous life, she had slowly developed a body of copper and iron, and a heart made of iron and stone. Defamation will not raise the slightest wave. Ming Fang was afraid of being noticed by the master, so she had to pour out the sober soup and was speechless all night. The next day, Zhao Lulai came back in a hurry and brought his newly groomed wife to offer tea to his mother. That year, the 4 books of women had not yet come out, and the restraint and contempt of women at that time had not reached the extreme, so there was no custom of examining Yuanpsa. Therefore, Guan Suyi did not have to bear the eyes of others or scrutiny, or contempt, or pity. But the news that the 2 of them failed to consummate their room still reached the old lady Sun's ears. Right now, Sun was sitting in the hall, his face with countless textures carved out by the wind and frost looked old and cold. Seeing the gorgeous and dignified face of King King's wife, she was stunned for a moment, then calmed down, took the tea and drank it, and gave a very heavy meeting gift. Xie is ill and has her own servant wife to take care of. You are just newly married, so you should be close, so you can spread the branches and leaves for my Zhao family. Putting down the teacup, she looked at her son, and her slightly soft face immediately tightened. Xie, there I will send someone to take care of it, and you don't need to be with you all day and night. As a man, you should have worked for the country. Look at what you look like now, all day long, love for children and sadness for the spring and autumn. Okay, go down, walk around the house with Suyi and get acquainted with the environment. Zhao Lulai was only superficially respectful to his mother. After accepting the promise, he led his new wife to leave. When he reached the fork, he parted ways and went to Penglai Garden as usual, but this time he finally made progress, leaving a sentence of sorry. Guan Suyi politely stated that she wanted to follow along, but was dismissed by him in a few words. It seemed that he was still in the defensive stage of his successor, and she would never let her approach a pair of children at will without a long inspection. Guan Suyi couldn't ask for it, but with an awkward expression on her face, she stood still for a long time before slowly leaving. The master and servant returned to the main room and sat down. Guan Suyi casually found an excuse to dismiss Ming Fang, and asked Minglan to pour a cup of hot tea to dispel the cold. Minglan hesitated. Miss, I don't know if the maidservant thinks too much. I always feel that the old lady's attitude towards the eldest lady and Lord Ho is wrong, as if a bit disgusted. No, it must be the maidservant who thinks too much. Son and granddaughter. It's not that you think too much. Guan Suyi unfolded a book and said casually, the Biho mansion in this town looks glamorous, but in fact it hides dirt and bad luck. They are not mothers, fathers, and fathers. If you are not a child, you don't know the courtesy, righteousness, honesty, filial piety, and loyalty, and there is no family affection. Even if you see any ways, don't talk about it, just don't care about our business. It's the phrase don't care about our business again. It seems that the young lady doesn't think of herself as Zhao's family at all. Minglan nodded repeatedly, blindly observing the learned master. The little girl was thrown away, but Guan Suyi inevitably fell into memory. At the beginning, she also noticed that the attitude of the old lady was different, and mourned her son more than she died. She was critical of her granddaughter in every possible way. She was extremely doting and pampering with her grandson. Obviously they are all in the family, and there is no distinction between the ancestors and the concubines. Why are they treated so differently? Could there be any unhumane secrets? This question was not solved by Zhao Wangshu until he was about to die. It turns out that Ye Zhiyu was Zhao Lulai's deceased wife. No wonder the old lady hated Zhao Chengzi and Ye Fan together, who told them to look like Ye Zhiyu. As for Zhao Wangshu, after all, he is Zhao Lulai's son, and he is also the hope of reviving the lintel, so he should naturally be well protected. Now that I think about it, the old lady had treated her well, but when she saw that she couldn't hold Zhao Lulai's heart, she slowly faded. She has never harmed herself, nor has she helped herself, she has nothing to do in her life. After thinking about it, Guan Suyi spread out the rice paper and started painting at the white snow and little red plum outside the window. In the main courtyard, the old lady's son had changed into gorgeous gowns, and she was lying on the couch in a well-used and old-fashioned garment. She caught a glimpse of the steward who had opened the curtain and asked in a deep voice, "Ho Ye did not accompany him? Guan's visiting the garden." "No, I went to Penglai garden by myself." Looking at Mrs. S. complexion, she seemed to be very wronged. The manager's mother whispered back, "I accompany the old man to travel north and south, and I have seen so many handsome figures, but there has never been one who can beat the Guan family. Wasn't that who claimed to be the #1 beauty in the Central Plains? Compared with the Guan family, it is really one in the sky and one on the ground. Master Ho doesn't like it now, but it doesn't mean that you don't like it in the future. Feelings will always come out. Go and give her the key to the warehouse, the account book, and the matching cards. In the future, she will be the well-deserved mistress of the home mansion. I have to carry her." I lifted it up. As if thinking of something, Sun snorted, "Give all the dowry left by the Tiguan. If it weren't for holding these dowries, Zhao Chengzi can come here to ask for peace a few days ago, as her father did." She hid to the horizon. She deserves to be the wicked kind of a bitch, with the same vicious mind and nasty methods. In order to prevent the unfilial son from consummating the house, she directly made herself sick. What's the point of her tossing this? The mother-in-law didn't dare to take the conversation, so she slandered in her heart, "Of course it's interesting. The new wife has a distinguished family background and both talents and appearance. If she is favored by Lord Ho and gives birth to a son, where can she and the eldest master have a foothold? As long as he dominates Lord Ho for a long time, it will be easy to attack the new lady again." Sun knew this well, and waved his hand tiredly, "Bring things over, I don't care about this house, let them toss on their own. I want to see if they can toss a flower out. Hope is closed." Like the legend, he is a shrewd and capable person, able to hold Lord Ho, and also able to suppress the evil kind. Guan Suyi was not surprised when she received the things from the old lady. In her previous life, she also took over the housekeeping power on the second day of her wedding. She was moved and panicked at the time, and immediately eliminated the resentment of being alone. As for Zhao Chengzi's dowry, she had been doing her best to take care of her, but she didn't expect that this action would become evidence of Ye Fan and Zhao Chengzi's attack on their greedy husband's property, so that she was almost divorced. Holding the dowry list, Guan Suyi twitched the corner of her mouth lightly, revealing a sneer. "Since you think I am too dedicated, save a little effort in this life and leave you with nothing."